My parents always called me the dumb one, while my perfect sister got a full ride to Harvard. On her graduation day, my father stood in front of 300 people and announced she would inherit his entire $13 million estate and handed her the keys to a brand new Tesla. I was sitting in the very back by the kitchen doors, staying quiet like I always did, paying for their lives with my secret labor. That was until a stranger in a charcoal suit walked right up to my cheap glass of water, slid a heavy wax-sealed envelope across the tablecloth, and whispered that it was time to show them who I really am. I sat at table 43. It was without a doubt the absolute worst seat in the grand ballroom of the Oak Creek Country Club. The heavy wooden swinging doors leading to the catering kitchen kept hitting the back of my wooden chair every single time a waiter rushed past with a heavy silver tray of prime rib. I could smell the hot dishwater and the sharp chemical scent of industrial floor cleaner mixing with the incredibly expensive floral arrangements my parents had ordered for the occasion. The centerpieces at the front tables were massive, towering arrangements of white orchids and imported lilies. My table had a single sad-looking hydrangea floating in a shallow glass bowl. The metaphor was absolutely not lost on me. I was the acceptable sacrifice of this family, placed entirely out of sight in the back of the room, so I would not ruin the perfect wealthy aesthetic they had cultivated for decades. I smoothed the skirt of my department store dress. It was navy blue, highly conservative and bought on clearance specifically, so I would not draw any attention away from the star of the day. I was 29 years old, working 60-hour weeks as a bookkeeper, crunching numbers for local contractors and small mom-and-pop stores just to keep my head above water. My parents told their wealthy friends that I was simply finding my way. That was their polite country club code for a failure. I was the cautionary tale they whispered about when they thought I could not hear them. While my sister Chloe was groomed for greatness, taking horseback riding lessons and attending exclusive summer programs, I was the one expected to clean up the messes. I was the one expected to be quiet, to be consistently useful, and to never ask for anything in return. The grand ballroom was packed to capacity, with 300 of their closest friends and business associates. There were wealthy commercial real estate developers, local politicians, shaking hands, and prominent members of their high society church congregation. The women dripped in diamonds, and the men wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than I made in an entire month of balancing ledgers. I took a sip of my ice water. It tasted strongly of chlorine and bitter regret. I looked toward the front of the room, where the head table sat elevated on a raised platform, completely bathed in warm, flattering spotlight. My sister Chloe sat right in the center, absorbing the adoration like a sponge, soaking up water. She wore a stunning white silk designer gown under her unzipped graduation robe. Her dark hair was perfectly blown out, falling over her shoulders in flawless, glossy waves. Next to her sat her fiancé, Jared, a junior corporate lawyer with a bright smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was already networking hard, standing up to shake hands and clink his crystal champagne flute with every single person who walked by their table. Jared had never liked me. He treated me exactly like the hired help, handing me his empty glasses at family dinners, and speaking to me slowly, as if my bookkeeping job meant I could not understand complex sentences. The string quartet in the far corner abruptly stopped playing their classical music. The low hum of wealthy conversation slowly faded into a respectful, expectant silence as my father Richard stood up from his chair. He tapped his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound echoed clearly through the massive ballroom, demanding absolute attention. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and leaned into the microphone standing at the podium. He looked exactly like the successful, benevolent patriarch he pretended to be. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His posture radiated arrogant authority. He beamed down at Chloe with a look of pure, unadulterated pride and deep affection. It was a look I had spent my entire childhood desperately chasing and had never once received. I gripped my linen napkin under the table, forcing my hands to remain completely still while my heart pounded fiercely against my ribs. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his booming voice rolling over the quiet crowd like thunder. "Thank you all for joining us on this truly momentous occasion. Today we are not just celebrating a graduation, we are celebrating the continuation of a mighty legacy." The crowd murmured their polite approval, hanging on his every single word. My mother Susan sat beside him gently, wiping a single perfectly practiced tear from her powdered cheek. She reached out and patted Chloe's hand for everyone to see, playing the absolute picture of a devoted, loving mother. When Chloe was born, my father continued pacing slightly across the elevated stage, completely commanding the room. I knew she was destined for absolute greatness. She was always the brightest star in the room, the hardest worker, the one who truly understood that our family name means excellence. And today, graduating at the very top of her class from Harvard Law School, she has proven that our faith in her was entirely justified. I watched from the shadows of table 43 as my father reached inside his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, dark leather folder and placed it deliberately on the wooden podium. The room grew completely silent now. Every single eye in the ballroom was glued directly to him. "Chloe, your mother and I have spent our entire lives building an empire," he said, looking down at my sister with a sickening sweetness. "We have worked tirelessly to ensure that our wealth and our legacy are fully protected for the next generation. But a legacy requires a capable, highly intelligent leader. It requires someone with the sharp intellect and the proper pedigree to manage what we have built over decades of hard work." He opened the heavy leather folder with a dramatic flourish. "Effective today, your mother and I have finalized the complete restructuring of our family trust. Upon my passing, Chloe, you will inherit the entirety of the family estate. The commercial properties, the investment portfolios, and the family home, all $13 million of it." The ballroom immediately erupted into a frenzy of applause. People were pushing back their chairs, standing up, clapping wildly and cheering, as if my father had just cured a major disease. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands in feigned shock, acting as though she had absolutely no idea this massive inheritance was coming. Jared leaned over and kissed her cheek, his eyes gleaming with raw, unfiltered greed. My mother stood up and wrapped her arms tightly around Chloe, burying her face in her daughter's dark hair. I just sat there in the back, gripping my cheap water glass so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. $13 million. My father was publicly disinheriting me in front of 300 people. He was cutting me out entirely, presenting it to polite society as a grand gesture of reward for the golden daughter who had done everything perfectly. But the theatrical performance was not over. My father held up both of his hands to quiet the cheering crowd. The applause slowly died down as people took their seats again, wiping tears of joy from their eyes. "Now, we all know that managing an estate like ours requires a lot of driving to important meetings," he said, pulling something shiny from his tailored pants pocket. "And a Harvard lawyer simply cannot be seen pulling up to the courthouse in just anything." He tossed a small black object through the air. Chloe reached up and caught it with a loud theatrical squeal. It was a car key fob. "The brand new Tesla Model S Plaid is parked right outside the front doors," he announced proudly. "Fully paid off. Happy graduation, sweetheart." The crowd cheered even louder this time. Chloe jumped up and threw her arms around our father's neck. I felt physically sick to my stomach. The hypocrisy was absolutely suffocating. A brand new Tesla, a $13 million inheritance, while I was living in a cramped, drafty studio apartment, eating cheap rice and beans, and sending them $3,000 every single month because they told me they were drowning in medical debt. I had completely given up my own college funds to help them. I had worked until my fingers literally bled, completely trusting that my family needed me to survive. And they took every single penny I sent them to secretly fund this lavish charade. My father took the microphone off the stand and held it in his hand. He was enjoying the spotlight far too much to give it up just yet. He scanned the massive room, his eyes sweeping over the well-dressed crowd, until they finally landed on me, sitting in the dark shadows, sitting by the swinging kitchen doors. I felt a cold dread wash over my entire body. I wanted the floorboards to open up and swallow me whole. I silently begged him to just look away, to ignore me, to continue praising his golden child. He did not. "Of course," my father said, his voice dropping into a tone dripping with heavy, unmistakable condescension. "We cannot forget our other daughter, Claire. She is back there somewhere." He pointed vaguely in my direction. Several heads at the nearby tables turned to look at me. The sheer pity in their eyes was suffocating. "Chloe might be the legal genius of the family," he said, pausing deliberately for maximum comedic effect. "But Claire is a bookkeeper. We are very proud of her too, even if she is still figuring out how to use a calculator." The grand ballroom erupted into loud laughter. It was not polite chuckling laughter. It was the loud, rolling laughter of people who felt entirely superior. I saw prominent members of our church laughing behind their hands. I saw my mother smiling tightly, sipping her expensive champagne. I saw Chloe shaking her head as if to say, "Poor simple Claire." The deep humiliation burned my face like an open flame. My own father had used his moment of glory to publicly humiliate me. He had reduced my entire existence to a cruel, mean-spirited punchline. He called me the dumb one, the one who could not figure out a simple calculator, the one who was barely worth acknowledging at a family event. They were laughing at the daughter who had quietly sacrificed her own life to keep them afloat. They were laughing at the woman who worked double shifts so they would not lose their home. I stared hard at the white tablecloth, my vision blurring with hot tears I absolutely refused to shed. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break in public. I kept my eyes on this table long enough for the laughter to pass over me instead of through me. For years I had treated moments like this as evidence that something was wrong with me. I would replay every insult afterward, trying to discover the flaw that made my own family so comfortable diminishing me. But that night, surrounded by 300 people applauding a version of our family that existed only because I kept paying for it, a different thought surfaced. I knew numbers better than anyone at the head table. I knew what happened when a ledger was built on false entries. Sooner or later, the imbalance appeared somewhere. My parents had spent years turning love into a ledger in which Chloe received every credit and I absorbed every liability. I had accepted their accounting because I believed family debt was sacred. Now, for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped accepting their numbers as truth. I still felt humiliated, my face still burned. But underneath the hurt, something quieter had begun to form, the first small refusal to keep confusing obedience with love. The laughter was still echoing off the high ceilings when the ambient energy around me suddenly shifted. The heavy swinging kitchen door opened, but it was not a waiter carrying dirty plates. A man was walking directly toward my table. He did not belong in this room. While the other men wore flashy suits meant to show off their wealth, this man wore a conservative, impeccably tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate, unquestionable respect. He was older, with sharp, highly intelligent eyes and silver hair combed neatly back. He walked with a quiet, deliberate purpose. He completely ignored the wealthy real estate agents and the local politicians. He walked in a straight, unwavering line directly to my lonely table. He reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy envelope made of thick cream paper, sealed with a dark red wax stamp. He placed it gently on the tablecloth right next to my water glass. He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine, and spoke in a voice so quiet and steady that only I could hear it. "They have always underestimated you, Claire," he whispered. "But your grandfather knew the truth. It is time to show them who you really are." The man turned around instantly and walked away, his polished leather shoes making absolutely no sound on the hardwood floor near the kitchen swinging doors. I reached out and touched the heavy paper. The thick cream envelope felt entirely out of place on the cheap white tablecloth of table 43. My fingers traced the raised edges of the dark red wax seal. It was cold and hard beneath my shaking fingertips. My grandfather had been dead for 4 years. My father told everyone in our family that the old man died, completely broke, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of unpaid bills and a tarnished reputation. Yet here was a man in a custom-tailored charcoal suit delivering a message that completely contradicted the absolute narrative my parents had drilled into my head since I was a child. Before I could slide the heavy envelope into my cheap clearance purse, a young waiter carrying a massive stack of dirty ceramic plates pushed aggressively through the swinging doors. The heavy wood slammed hard against the back of my wooden chair. The unexpected impact jerked my arms forward. The envelope slipped from my clumsy fingers and fell directly onto the floor, landing right near a spilled drop of red cocktail sauce. I dropped to my knees immediately. I scrambled under the table, my hands patting the sticky hardwood floor in a desperate, blind panic. I snatched the envelope just before the apologetic waiter stepped backward with his heavy rubber sole shoes. I brushed a tiny speck of dust off the cream paper, my heart pounding fiercely against my ribs. I stayed crouched under the table for a long, silent moment. Down here, hidden from the dazzling chandelier light and the 300 wealthy guests laughing above me, the truth of my entire life felt completely suffocating. For the past 7 years, I had worked 60-hour weeks as a freelance bookkeeper just to keep my parents from going completely under. I started working the exact month I turned 22. I spent my days and nights hunched over a cheap, overheating laptop in a cramped studio apartment that smelled permanently of damp plaster and cheap instant noodles. I managed complex financial accounts for local plumbers, small grocery stores, and independent contractors. My back constantly ached from sitting on a cheap metal folding chair. My eyesight was steadily getting worse from staring at tiny spreadsheet cells late into the night. Every single dollar I earned beyond my basic rent and my meager grocery bill went directly into my parents' joint bank accounts. I completely trusted them. When my father sat me down in their lavish kitchen 7 years ago, he looked me right in the eyes and told me they were drowning in insurmountable medical debts from my mother's supposed rare heart condition. He told me the bank was threatening immediate foreclosure on the family home and that they would be out on the street by the end of the month. He cried real tears that day, his shoulders shaking as he held his face in his hands. I believed every single word he said. I skipped my own college dreams to keep them afloat. I actually had an acceptance letter to a state university program for accounting sitting on my desk the day he cried in the kitchen. I had already packed my bags and bought a few new notebooks. I threw the acceptance letter in the trash that very same night. I unpacked my bags, canceled my dorm registration, and took online bookkeeping certification courses at night while working 3 part-time minimum wage jobs during the day. I was the acceptable sacrifice. I was the daughter designated to shoulder the heavy, unglamorous burden of financial survival, while my parents focused all their remaining resources and energy on grooming Chloe for absolute greatness. Chloe never had to get a part-time job. Chloe never had to worry about the electric bill being paid on time. Chloe was sent to expensive standardized test prep classes, exclusive summer internships, and week-long networking retreats. They told me I was saving the family. They told me my silent sacrifice was the only thing keeping a roof over our heads and food on the table. I bumped my head against the bottom of the table as I sat back up in my chair. I clutched the envelope tightly against my stomach, trying to steady my rapid breathing. I looked toward the elevated head table at the front of the grand ballroom. Chloe was holding up her shiny new Tesla car key, laughing brightly, while our father poured her another glass of expensive vintage champagne. The $13 million estate. That is what he had just announced to the cheering crowd. $13 million in properties and portfolios, and a brand new luxury car. Meanwhile, I had transferred $3,000 to them just last Tuesday because my mother claimed her heart medication costs had doubled this month and insurance was refusing to cover the difference. Claire, what on earth are you doing? I jumped in my seat. My mother Susan was standing right next to table 43. I had not seen her walk over from the front of the room. She held a crystal flute of champagne in her left hand. Her right hand was resting sharply on her hip. She wore a stunning silver silk designer dress that probably cost more than my entire yearly rent. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a single silver strand out of place. Her cold eyes swept over my clearance navy dress with a look of profound, undisguised disappointment. I quickly slid the wax-sealed envelope under my linen napkin, pressing both of my hands flat on top of it. Nothing, Mom. I just dropped my salad fork on the floor and had to pick it up. She sighed deeply, a highly dramatic sound meant to show exactly how exhausting she found my mere existence. Please try not to draw attention to yourself down here, Claire. People are already asking why you are sitting all the way back here by the kitchen doors instead of up front with the family. I told the church elders you specifically requested a quiet table because you get overwhelmed and anxious in large social settings. I did not request this table, Mom. You personally assigned the seating chart. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me tonight. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so the wealthy real estate agents at the neighboring table would not hear her scolding me. Tonight is about your sister. It is about celebrating the incredible, unmatched success of this family. We need to project a unified, perfect front to high society. You understand how important appearances are to your father's business partners. I looked at her perfectly powdered face. I looked at the heavy, expensive diamond necklace resting glittering against her collarbone. I pay the mortgage on the house you are living in, Mom. Keep your voice down. She glanced nervously around the ballroom, her polite public smile instantly snapping back onto her face for a passing waiter. We appreciate your little financial contributions, Claire. We really do. but you absolutely cannot compare your modest bookkeeping money to the legacy Chloe is building for us. Chloe is going to be a senior partner at a major corporate law firm. She is elevating the entire family name in this city. You should be immensely proud of her instead of sitting back here pouting in the dark." "I am not pouting. I am just drinking my water and staying out of the way." She took a delicate sip of her champagne and looked down at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Speaking of your little contributions, did you transfer the extra money for the property tax bill like we discussed? Your father checked the joint account this morning and said the deposit had not cleared yet. You know the county will charge us a massive late fee if it is not paid in full by Friday afternoon." I stared at her. The property tax bill on a $13 million estate. She was standing here dripping in expensive diamonds, drinking vintage champagne, and demanding I pay the property taxes out of my meager bookkeeping salary. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demand made my chest physically ache. "I sent the wire transfer yesterday morning," I said, keeping my voice completely neutral and devoid of emotion. "It usually takes 48 hours to clear through my local credit union." "Well, make sure you call your bank manager first thing tomorrow morning and expedite it. We cannot have a public foreclosure notice filed against the house right after Chloe graduates from Harvard. It would completely ruin her professional momentum and embarrass us at the country club." Foreclosure. There was that terrible word again. The exact same word they had used 7 years ago to guilt me into giving up my entire future. The exact same terrifying threat they held over my head every single month when they needed more money to fund their secret lifestyle. I skipped my own college dreams to keep them afloat. I gave up my 20s, my meager savings, and my personal freedom because I truly believed they were desperate and dying. But standing here looking at my mother's diamond necklace and remembering my sister's new Tesla, the grand illusion was shattering into sharp, jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. "I will call the bank tomorrow morning," I promised softly. "Good girl." My mother reached out and patted my shoulder twice. It was the kind of absent, dismissive pat you might give an obedient stray dog you did not want to touch for too long. "Jared's parents are coming over to our table now to take formal family photos. Please stay here until the professional photographer is completely finished. We do not want you wandering into the background of the expensive shots. Your cheap navy dress completely clashes with the elegant color scheme we chose for the album." "I will stay right here, Mom." She turned around and walked back toward the brightly lit head table, her silver silk dress swishing elegantly across the ballroom floor. I watched her greet Jared's wealthy parents with a wide, bright smile, extending her arms for warm, enthusiastic hugs, as if she were the kindest woman in the world. She was a completely different person when she was performing for an audience. I lifted the linen napkin slowly. The thick envelope was still there, heavy and waiting. I ran my thumb over the red wax seal again, feeling the imprint of a crest I did not recognize. My grandfather's attorney had walked into this room with absolute unwavering purpose. "They have always underestimated you, Claire." Those were his exact whispered words. Before I could even process what that meant, another shadow fell over my table. I looked up to see Jared, my future brother-in-law, standing over me. He did not look at my face. He held out an empty crystal champagne flute. He shook it slightly so the melting ice clinked loudly against the expensive glass. "Take this to the bar for me, Claire," Jared said, his voice dripping with casual entitlement. "And tell the bartender I want the vintage reserve this time. The cheap stuff they are pouring at the front table is far too dry for my taste." I stared at the empty glass in his hand. Jared was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that fit him flawlessly. He was wearing a shiny Rolex watch that my parents had bought him as an extravagant wedding gift, using the emergency money I transferred to them for supposed roof repairs last spring. "I am not a waitress, Jared," I said quietly. He finally looked down at me. His bright, aggressive networking smile was completely gone. His cold, calculating eyes narrowed into a glare. "Do not make a scene at my fiancé's party, Claire. I am parched from talking to all these important investors. You are sitting right next to the kitchen doors anyway, like the help. It will take you 2 seconds to be useful." "The main bar is on the complete opposite side of the room," I pointed out, refusing to take the glass from his extended hand. "Then you better start walking right now," he said, dropping the empty glass directly onto the white tablecloth right next to my cheap glass of tap water. A few drops of leftover champagne splashed out and stained the pristine white linen. "And grab a fresh napkin while you are up. Someone spilled something here. It looks disgusting." He turned around and walked away without waiting for a response. He immediately stopped to aggressively shake hands with a local politician, his bright, charming smile instantly snapping back onto his face as he launched into a conversation about corporate tax law. I looked at the spilled champagne slowly soaking into the tablecloth. I looked at my hands resting on my lap. My knuckles were red and dry from scrubbing my own apartment floors because I could not afford cleaning supplies. My fingernails were cut short and completely unpolished. I had spent 7 long, agonizing years believing I was the essential glue holding a sick and broken family together. I had spent 7 years deeply believing my daily sacrifices were noble, necessary, and appreciated. I had lived in a cramped, drafty studio apartment where the heat barely worked in the freezing winter. I had eaten cheap rice and beans for weeks at a time just to make sure I could cover their supposed mounting medical debts. I had skipped essential doctor appointments for myself because I could not afford the basic copay after sending them their requested monthly allowance. And they had used my stolen wages to build this massive empire of lies. A loud, thunderous burst of applause erupted from the front of the room. Chloe and Jared were cutting a massive, multi-tiered graduation cake covered in edible gold leaf. The professional photographer's bright flash went off repeatedly, capturing their perfect, wealthy, carefree smiles. My father stood right next to them holding his crystal wine glass high in the air, playing the perfect role of the benevolent, successful patriarch for the cheering crowd. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was exactly what my father called me during his speech, the dumb one. They thought I would just sit at table 43 for the rest of my miserable life, quietly paying their bills while they flaunted their stolen wealth to the entire world. They believed they had completely trapped me in their suffocating narrative of family obligation and endless guilt. I picked up the heavy envelope and held it firmly in my right hand. The thick cream paper felt like a loaded weapon. I pushed my wooden chair back slowly. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, but the harsh sound was completely drowned out by the string quartet starting to play a lively, upbeat classical piece for the guests to dance to. I stood up, smoothing the front of my clearance navy dress. I did not look at the elevated head table. I did not look at my cruel mother or my boastful father or my golden sister. I turned my back on the dazzling chandelier light and the 300 cheering, oblivious guests. I walked directly toward the heavy swinging kitchen doors, pushed them open with my shoulder, and stepped into the long, quiet hallway that led to the country club bathrooms. The cold brass handle of the women's restroom yielded with a heavy click. I slipped inside and pressed my back flat against the solid oak door. I reached behind me and turned the deadbolt until it locked with a loud, satisfying thud. The country club bathroom was a sanctuary of silent, echoing marble and polished gold mirrors. The air smelled strongly of expensive jasmine soap and fresh white orchids sitting in crystal vases. It was a massive, jarring contrast to the loud, cheering ballroom I had just escaped. My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the thick envelope onto the immaculate tile floor. I walked over to the furthest sink and gripped the cool edge of the marble counter. I stared at my pale reflection in the mirror. My breathing was ragged and shallow. I looked down at the cream-colored paper in my hands. The dark red wax seal was thick and heavy, stamped with a formal crest. I peeled the wax away with my thumbnail. It cracked into pieces and fell into the pristine white porcelain sink. I slid my index finger under the heavy flap and tore the envelope open. A thick stack of documents slipped out into my palms. They were heavy, official, and printed on expensive watermarked paper. The very first page was a formal cover letter on the letterhead of a prominent downtown law firm. I unfolded it slowly. The crisp sound of the paper echoed loudly in the quiet bathroom. I cleared my dry throat and began to read the words in a harsh, low whisper, needing to hear them spoken aloud in the empty room. Dear Claire, the letter began. My name is Jonathan Vance. I am the senior partner at Vance and Associates. I served as the primary legal counsel for your late grandfather William for over 30 years. I am writing to you today to formally execute the final directives of his estate, my grandfather. I stared at the word on the page. My father Richard had told everyone in our family that Grandpa William died completely broke 4 years ago. My father claimed the old man made terrible, reckless investments in his final years and lost every single penny he had ever made in commercial real estate. My parents had refused to even pay for his funeral. They told our wealthy church friends it was a tragic story of financial ruin. They said they were far too burdened by my mother's mounting medical debts to help him. I kept reading the attorney's letter aloud, pacing slowly across the marble floor. Jonathan explained that my father had been deliberately kept in the dark about the estate. Grandpa William had not died bankrupt. Before his death, he had placed a lucrative commercial real estate portfolio across 3 states into the private William Heritage Trust and ordered Jonathan to keep its true value confidential for 4 years. The trust was designed to preserve the assets until they could pass to me without my father interfering. He had chosen Chloe's graduation day for the disclosure deliberately. The next sentence told me to review every attached document before contacting anyone in my family. I stopped pacing. I flipped to the second page. It was a certified bank statement from a major national wealth management firm. The account was listed under the William Heritage Trust. I scanned the lines of numbers. My eyes struggled to focus on the endless rows of zeros printed in bold black ink. I traced my finger under the first line. Total liquid assets, $12 million. I gasped out loud. The sound bounced off the polished walls. I moved my finger down to the next line. Total commercial real estate valuation, $38 million. $50 million. The paper trembled violently in my hands. $50 million. My grandfather did not die broke. He had built a massive, untouchable empire, and my father had lied to everyone about it. The shock lasted only a moment. I forced myself to keep reading. Whatever else was in that envelope had been timed for this exact night, and I needed the whole truth before I made a single decision. I forced myself to read the statement again from the top this time, the way I would examine a client's books. I checked the account name, the valuation date, the institution, the certification language, and the figures. $12 million in liquid assets, $38 million in commercial property, $50 million in total value. The numbers did not change when I looked at them professionally instead of emotionally. That mattered to me. Shock could distort a memory. Paper did not care how stunned I was. The pages carried the quiet weight of something my parents could not talk me out of. For 7 years, Richard and Susan had survived by controlling the story before I had time to examine the facts. They said medical debt and I sent money. They said foreclosure and I worked another weekend. They said Chloe needed opportunity and I made myself smaller. But these documents required no faith. They were specific, dated, signed, and enforceable. I realized that was why my breathing finally began to slow. I was not being asked to trust another family promise. I was being given evidence. I walked back to the counter and spread the documents out on the dry marble. I turned to the third page. It was a legally binding trust document. It was stamped, notarized, and completely official. I read the legal jargon carefully, using the skills I had honed over 7 years of analyzing financial contracts. The terms were absolute and undeniable. The trust bypassed my father completely. It bypassed my mother. It bypassed Chloe. My grandfather had left the entire $50 million real estate empire entirely to me. I was the sole legal beneficiary. I flipped to the very last page. It was a handwritten letter on my grandfather's personal stationery. The ink was faded, but his sharp, aggressive handwriting was unmistakable. I leaned over the sink and read his words aloud, needing to hear his voice in the empty room. "My dearest Claire," I read slowly, "I know you are sitting somewhere quiet reading this. You always did prefer the quiet. If Jonathan has timed this correctly, you are likely reading this on the day your father has chosen to crown your sister as his sole heir. I want you to know that I saw this coming years ago. I saw exactly who your parents truly are." I wiped a single tear from my cheek and continued reading. "Your father thinks he is a clever man. He thinks he managed to fool everyone with his stories of medical debts and financial ruin. But I knew better. 5 years ago, I noticed discrepancies in the way your parents lived versus what they claimed. I noticed you were driving a dangerous, rusted car while your mother bought new diamond necklaces. I noticed you skipped college while Chloe attended expensive summer programs. So I hired a private investigator to look into their finances." I placed my hand flat on the marble counter to steady myself. A private investigator. The investigator brought me a stack of reports that broke my heart. The letter continued. I read every single file. I saw the bank transfers. I knew that your parents were exploiting your labor to fund their lavish lifestyle and your sister's Ivy League education and the expensive costs her scholarship did not cover. I knew they were draining your meager bookkeeping income and telling you it was for medical emergencies. You were working yourself to the bone for them while they used your money to pay for luxury vacations and country club dues. My chest heaved. I gripped the edges of the sink. I read the words again aloud. Exploiting my labor, funding their lifestyle and the expensive parts of her Harvard life that her scholarship did not cover. My grandfather knew. He had seen the absolute truth while the rest of the world looked the other way. He knew my parents' favoritism was not just emotional, it was entirely financial, and I was the one secretly footing the bill for their perfect image. I could have confronted Richard, my grandfather wrote. I could have exposed him right then and there, but I knew your father. If I had exposed him, he would have simply manipulated you into giving him whatever I left you. He would have used your guilt and your good heart against you. You were not ready to fight him back then. You still believed they loved you. You still believed you had to save them. I needed to give you time to see their true nature for yourself. I needed to wait until they discarded you completely. I traced the faded ink of my grandfather's signature. He was absolutely right. 7 years ago, if he had handed me $50 million, I would have handed it directly to my father to pay off his fake medical debts. I would have given them everything because I believed it was my duty as a daughter. My grandfather had played a massive, brilliant game of chess. He pretended to die broke so my father would not contest the estate. He hid the money in a blind trust where my family could not touch it. And he waited for the exact moment my father publicly betrayed me to hand me the weapon I needed to fight back. You are not the dumb one, Claire, the letter concluded. You have always possessed a brilliant analytical mind. You understand numbers. You understand systems. You have kept that family afloat with your bare hands. Now it is time to use those hands to build your own empire. Do not let them take another dime from you. The money is yours. The properties are yours. Contact Jonathan immediately. He has a plan to help you secure everything. Make them pay for what they did to you. Love, Grandpa William. I folded the letter slowly and deliberately. I placed it back into the thick cream envelope along with the bank statement and the trust document. I slipped the envelope deep inside my cheap clearance purse and zipped it shut. I looked at my reflection in the gold-framed mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me was not the same woman who had walked into this bathroom 20 minutes ago. The scared, humiliated bookkeeper who sat at table 43 was gone entirely. My parents had built their entire shiny, perfect world on my stolen wages. They had called me stupid in front of 300 people. They had laughed at my cheap clothes and my incredibly long working hours. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully drained me of my youth and my future to launch Chloe into high society. They had absolutely no idea that I now held the legal deed to a $50 million empire. I walked over to the paper towel dispenser. I pulled out a crisp brown sheet and wiped a few drops of spilled water from the edge of my sleeve. I smoothed the front of my clearance navy blue dress. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling a strange new power humming intensely in my veins. It was not a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, absolute certainty. I walked to the heavy oak door and grabbed the brass handle. I pulled it open with a firm, steady grip. The loud, pulsing music and the rich, arrogant laughter from the grand ballroom instantly flooded the quiet hallway. I stepped out of the bathroom and walked directly back toward the massive party. I was not going to hide by the swinging kitchen doors anymore. I was going to walk right up to the elevated head table, look my cruel father right in his lying eyes and smile. The silent war had just begun, and I finally had the ultimate ammunition. I pushed through the heavy side exit door of the country club, leaving the pulsing music and the arrogant laughter completely behind me. The cool night air hit my hot face like a splash of ice water. I walked fast across the sprawling, manicured asphalt parking lot, keeping my head down and sticking to the dark shadows near the tall, decorative hedges. I bypassed the shiny Mercedes sedans, the custom Porsche SUVs, and the sleek imported sports cars belonging to my father's wealthy friends and business associates. My 12-year-old Honda Civic was parked under a flickering, dying yellow street lamp at the very edge of the employee lot, hidden away so it would not ruin the aesthetic of the event. I unlocked the driver's side door, slid into the worn fabric seat, and locked it immediately behind me. The car smelled like old coffee and the cheap vanilla air freshener I had bought at the local dollar store. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my heavy canvas work tote. I pulled out my cheap, overheating laptop. It took 3 agonizing minutes to boot up the ancient hard drive whirring loudly in the quiet car. The battery was practically dead, so I had to start the engine and plug the bulky frayed power adapter into the cigarette lighter to keep the screen from going completely black. The dashboard lights cast a faint greenish glow over my shaking hands. I reached into my clearance purse, pulled out the thick cream envelope, and tipped it upside down. A small, sleek silver USB drive slid out onto my palm. It felt incredibly heavy for something so small. My grandfather's letter had promised undeniable proof of my family's true nature. I took a deep, steadying breath, forced my hands to stop trembling, and pushed the silver drive into the side port of my laptop. A small, secure folder icon popped up instantly on my cluttered desktop. I moved my thumb over the trackpad and clicked it open. There were dozens of meticulously organized subfolders, all neatly labeled with specific dates, bank names, and transaction codes. My grandfather's private investigator had done a shockingly thorough, highly professional job. As a freelance bookkeeper, I looked at financial records all day long. I knew exactly how to read complex ledgers, how to track hidden wire transfers, and how to spot structural inconsistencies in cash flow. I took a sip of lukewarm water from a plastic bottle in my cup holder, leaned closer to the glowing screen, and clicked on the very first folder in the directory. It was cleanly labeled Medical Expenses. Inside was a single massive PDF document. It was a comprehensive official health insurance summary for my mother spanning the last 7 years. I opened it and zoomed in on the fine print. I scrolled down the long columns of billing codes, deductible records, and coverage limits. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs like a trapped bird. Total out-of-pocket medical expenses for the entire year of 2017 were zero. 2018 was zero. 2019 was zero. Every single year showed the exact same zero balance. I scrolled down to the policy details. My parents held an elite platinum tier health insurance policy, fully paid through my father's commercial real estate business. Their coverage was absolute flawless and covered everything from standard checkups to major surgeries with zero deductibles. There were no mounting insurmountable medical debts. The records showed no unpaid specialist balances, no crushing out of network bills, and no uncovered medication costs, matching the emergencies my parents had described to me. Whatever care my mother had received was covered under the policy. The financial crisis they had used to keep me sending money simply did not exist. I clicked out of the medical folder, my chest feeling incredibly tight and restricted, as if the oxygen in the car had suddenly vanished. I opened the next folder labeled Claire Monthly Transfers. Inside, I found a detailed forensic spreadsheet tracking every single $3,000 wire transfer I had sent them over the last 84 months. My eyes scanned the familiar dates and the agonizing amounts. Next to my transfer column was the corresponding destination account routing number. They were not putting my hard-earned money into a joint checking account to pay for life-saving medication or to stop the bank from initiating a devastating foreclosure on their massive home. The $3,000 a month I sent them was being directly deposited into a luxury investment account for Chloe's wedding and European vacations. I clicked open the attached monthly bank statements to trace the actual undeniable spending, tracking the flow of my stolen wages. The private investigator had highlighted the most damning, extravagant transactions in bright yellow ink. There was a cleared charge for $8,000 to an elite luxury travel agency based in Rome. The date on the transaction matched exactly with a week last summer when I had lived off plain peanut butter sandwiches and tap water because my father explicitly told me they were desperately behind on the electric bill and facing utility shutoffs. There was a $12,000 direct deposit to a boutique appointment-only bridal shop in Manhattan for Chloe's custom silk wedding gown. Another massive transaction showed a non-refundable payment to an exclusive event planner for a lavish multi-day destination bachelorette party in Paris. I sat in my freezing car staring blankly at the bright screen. The sheer staggering scale of the financial deception was paralyzing. I had been skipping my own essential dental appointments because I simply could not afford the basic office copay. I had been wearing cheap clearance rack shoes with worn soles that let the freezing winter rain seep in. I had worked until my hands cramped and my vision blurred, taking on extra exhausting bookkeeping clients late into the night, all because I deeply, truly believed my family was drowning in terrible debt. But they were not drowning. They were entirely exploiting my labor to fund their lavish lifestyle and Chloe's Ivy League education and the expenses her scholarship did not cover. They had systematically taken my youth, my meager savings, and my absolute unwavering trust and converted it directly into first-class plane tickets to Italy and designer wedding accessories. I gripped the hard edge of the laptop, feeling a sick, hot wave of nausea rising rapidly in my throat. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out. I wanted to smash the glowing screen into pieces. But my professional instincts took over. I forced myself to keep reading to uncover every single layer of their betrayal before I made a move. The worst folder was still sitting quietly at the very bottom of the directory. It was labeled in bold red capital letters, Urgent Legal Risk. I clicked it open with a trembling index finger. A massive, heavily redacted PDF file filled my screen. It looked like standard, highly complex commercial banking paperwork. I leaned closer to the monitor, my tired eyes tracing the dense legal jargon, the complex amortization schedules, and the property appraisal values. It was a formal home equity line of credit document, officially stamped and approved by a major national wealth management bank. But the property listed as collateral was not my parents' massive $13 million country club mansion. It was a modest, slightly run-down commercial warehouse property located on the industrial side of downtown. I frowned, completely confused by the strange discrepancy. Why would my wealthy father take out an equity loan on a property that barely generated any substantial rental income? Then I looked closer at the primary borrower information, printed boldly at the top of the lending application. The borrower name was Claire. I stopped breathing entirely. The cold air in the car suddenly felt too thin to sustain me. The primary borrower name was Claire. I did not own a commercial warehouse. I had never owned any real estate in my entire life. My credit history consisted of a single student credit card and my cheap apartment lease. I scrolled rapidly down to the final signature page of the binding loan agreement. There, right at the bottom of the ironclad contract, next to the official notary stamp, was my full legal name. It was signed in dark blue ink. But it was absolutely not my handwriting. My signature was small, neat, and highly legible. The signature glaring back at me from the screen was entirely wrong. The loops were overly aggressive. The downward slant was completely off. It looked exactly like my father's sharp, arrogant, unmistakable cursive. He had forged my signature to take out a massive $200,000 equity loan on a property to buy Chloe's new Tesla and fund his country club membership. I sat completely frozen in the driver's seat, the cheap vinyl digging sharply into my back. My own father had committed deliberate federal identity theft. The private investigator's detailed legal notes attached to the file explained the sinister, precise mechanics of the massive fraud. My father had used my Social Security number, which he had memorized since I was a child, and my steady, verifiable bookkeeping income history to secure the massive loan. Because I lived extremely frugally, had excellent credit, and carried absolutely zero existing debt. The bank's automated underwriting system approved the application almost instantly. He had secretly transferred the legal title of one of his smaller, failing commercial properties directly into my name, without my knowledge or consent, using completely forged notary stamps, and then immediately borrowed the maximum possible equity against it. I looked at the official bank disbursement records attached to the final page of the PDF. The $200,000 had been fully released by the bank just 3 weeks ago. The massive funds were instantly transferred out of the holding account. I traced the routing numbers down the page, my eyes burning fiercely with unshed tears. $140,000 went directly to a high-end luxury auto dealership downtown. It was the exact to the penny purchase price for the brand new fully loaded Tesla Model S Plaid that Chloe was currently flaunting to the cheering graduation party guests inside the ballroom. The remaining $60,000 went via direct expedited wire transfer to the Oak Creek Country Club to secure my father's upgraded lifetime elite membership status. He bought his golden daughter a luxury car in my name. He bought his high society status in my name. I reopened the disbursement page and followed the transaction chain one more time, refusing to let rage make me careless. The loan amount matched. The dates matched. The dealership payment matched the car sitting outside. The country club wire matched the institution, whose ballroom had just filled with laughter at my expense. Every number connected cleanly to the next. That was the moment the betrayal stopped feeling abstract. My father had not simply lied to me in a kitchen or manipulated me with tears. He had converted my identity into collateral. He had treated my clean credit, my work history, and even the discipline with which I had lived below my means as assets he was entitled to borrow against. The very habits he mocked, my careful budgeting, my refusal to carry debt, my unglamorous bookkeeping work, were the reasons the fraud had succeeded so easily. I saved copies of the relevant pages into a separate folder on my laptop, naming them by date and transaction. I did not know yet what Jonathan would tell me to do, but I knew one thing from years of reconciling accounts. When someone falsifies the books, you preserve the original trail before you confront the person who falsified it. I slammed the laptop shut. The sudden pitch-black darkness in my car felt suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I gripped the cheap plastic steering wheel with both hands, my knuckles turning stark white from the immense vibrating pressure. I rested my forehead against the cold steering column, letting the absolute horror of my reality wash over me. The grand illusion of my family obligation was completely and utterly obliterated. I was not just the family scapegoat, the quiet daughter sitting by the kitchen doors. I was their unwitting financial hostage. My father had deliberately bound me in a terrifying, inescapable legal trap. If I ever decided to cut them off, if I stopped paying them my monthly allowance of $3,000, they would immediately stop making the hidden monthly payments on that fraudulent $200,000 loan. The massive loan would instantly go into default. The bank would come directly after me. Because my name was forged on all the official documents, I would be the one facing total financial ruin, a destroyed credit score, and potential bankruptcy proceedings while they danced carefree at Chloe's upcoming expensive wedding. They had planned it this way. They had intentionally set me up to take the fall if their empire ever collapsed. The cold, calculated cruelty of it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. My grandfather had known. He had hired the investigator and seen the deadly trap my father was secretly building around me. That is exactly why my grandfather had bypassed my father entirely. That is why he had left me the $50 million commercial real estate empire in a highly protected blind trust. It was not just a generous inheritance. It was impenetrable financial armor. It was the absolute, undeniable weapon I needed to survive this silent war. I did not cry. The betrayal was far too deep, far too structural for tears. The sorrow and deep humiliation I had felt sitting at table 43 was completely burned away, leaving behind nothing but cold, diamond-hard focus. I opened my cheap clearance purse and pulled out my cell phone. I looked at the bright screen. It was 9:45 in the evening. My family was still inside the country club, drinking expensive vintage champagne, laughing at my expense, and celebrating their stolen wealth. They thought I was the dumb one. They thought I was safely trapped in their suffocating web of forged documents and endless guilt. They were completely wrong. I was a professional bookkeeper. I knew exactly how to track every single stolen dollar, and I knew exactly how to destroy a fraudulent ledger. I dialed the direct cell phone number printed on the business card of my grandfather's attorney. It rang twice before he answered. Jonathan answered on the second ring. His voice was sharp and awake, completely lacking the grogginess of late evening. Jonathan speaking. "This is Claire," I said, keeping my voice low in the cold, dark interior of my Honda Civic. "I am officially accepting my grandfather's inheritance. Every single penny of it." I could hear the faint sound of a leather chair creaking through the receiver. "I had a feeling you would be calling tonight, Claire. I take it you reviewed the contents of the flash drive." "I reviewed every single folder," I replied, my grip tightening on the plastic steering wheel. "My father did not just steal my monthly wages. He committed federal identity theft. He forged my signature on a $200,000 commercial equity loan to buy Chloe's car and pay for his country club dues." A heavy, absolute silence stretched across the phone line. When Jonathan finally spoke, his tone had shifted from polite professionalism to a deep, dangerous seriousness. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, Claire. Do not confront them tonight. Do not send an angry text message. Do not breathe a single word of this discovery to your father, your mother, or your sister." "I am not going to say anything to them," I assured him. "I do not cry over stolen money. I recover it, but I realize I have a massive problem. If I walk into probate court tomorrow and publicly claim a $50 million trust, my father will instantly know I have deep pockets. He holds a fraudulent $200,000 loan entirely in my name. If I cut them off now and claim my wealth, they will immediately default on that loan on purpose. They will sue me, claim I authorized the debt, and drag the entire $50 million trust into years of brutal family litigation. You are exactly as brilliant as your grandfather promised you were, Jonathan said. You have correctly identified the trap. Your father constructed this fraudulent loan as an insurance policy against you. If you show your hand too early, he will weaponize that debt to destroy your credibility and freeze your assets. We have to dismantle his trap quietly, piece by piece, before we spring ours. How do we do that? I asked. You are going to come to my downtown office tomorrow morning at 9 sharp, Jonathan instructed. I am bringing in a colleague. His name is Robert Stanton. He is the most ruthless forensic accountant in the state. He specializes in unwinding complex corporate fraud and tracing forged banking documents. We are going to build an ironclad federal case against your father before you ever stop paying their monthly bills. And in the meantime, I asked, looking out through the rain-streaked windshield toward the glowing lights of the country club. In the meantime, Jonathan said smoothly, you are going to go to your Sunday family dinners. You are going to continue wearing your cheap clothes. You are going to act exactly like the subservient, clueless bookkeeper they firmly believe you are. You give them absolutely no reason to suspect the ground is opening up beneath their feet. Can you do that? I looked at the glowing dashboard clock. The graduation party was still raging inside. I can play the dumb one for a little while longer, I said. I will see you at 9 tomorrow morning. I hung up the phone. I started the engine, shifted the car into gear, and drove out of the employee parking lot. I did not look back at the grand ballroom. The silent war had officially begun. The next morning, the sky over the city was a bright, unforgiving blue. I walked into the soaring glass lobby of Jonathan's downtown law firm wearing my usual gray slacks and a sensible cardigan. The receptionist led me immediately into a massive corner conference room offering a sweeping view of the city skyline. Jonathan was already sitting at the long mahogany table. Next to him sat a man in a crisp white button-down shirt with his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. Claire, please have a seat, Jonathan said, standing up to greet me. This is Robert Stanton. Robert did not offer a polite, empty smile. He slid a thick, empty legal pad across the polished wood and clicked his pen. Jonathan briefed me on the situation this morning, Robert said, his voice brisk and highly analytical. You have a $200,000 fraudulent loan carrying your forged signature. We need to prove beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt that you did not authorize, sign, or benefit from that transaction. I opened my canvas work tote and pulled out my overheating laptop. I set it on the table and pushed the silver USB drive toward Robert. The private investigator compiled the primary banking documents, I explained. The funds were disbursed 3 weeks ago. $140,000 went directly to a luxury auto dealership. $60,000 went to the Oak Creek Country Club. Robert plugged the drive into his own sleek tablet. His eyes scanned the digital files rapidly. Your father was sloppy, Claire. Arrogant criminals usually are. He used an electronic notary service to finalize this equity loan. He assumed that because he had your social security number and your financial history, nobody would ever look closely at the digital footprints. Can we trace the electronic notary? I asked, leaning forward. Absolutely, Robert replied, typing a rapid series of commands into his keyboard. Every single digital signature captures an exact IP address and a timestamp. I am going to subpoena the server logs from the electronic notary company. When I do, I guarantee those logs will show that the loan was digitally signed from the IP address registered to your father's commercial real estate office, not your studio apartment. But what if he claims I was sitting in his office and signed it myself? I pointed out, playing devil's advocate to ensure our case was bulletproof. Then we look at the timestamp, Robert said, pointing the tip of his pen at the screen. This document was finalized on a Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon. Where were you on that exact date and time? I opened my bookkeeping calendar on my phone. I scrolled back 3 weeks. I was sitting in the back office of a local plumbing company doing their quarterly payroll. The owner of the company was sitting right across the desk from me the entire time. Perfect, Jonathan interjected, folding his hands on the table. You have an ironclad alibi and an independent witness proving you were nowhere near your father's computer when that signature was executed. Robert will compile the digital forensic evidence. I am going to begin quietly establishing the blind corporate trust to receive your $50 million inheritance. I looked at Jonathan. I need to make sure my family cannot touch a single dime of that money once the transfer is complete. They will not be able to find it, let alone touch it, Jonathan assured me. A blind trust means the assets are held by a corporate entity. Your name will not appear on any public banking registry or real estate deed. To the outside world, and more importantly to your greedy family, you will remain a struggling bookkeeper, making $40,000 a year. How long will it take to build the fraud case? I asked Robert. Give me 3 weeks to secure the subpoenas and map the exact flow of the stolen money, Robert said, closing his tablet. Until then, you must maintain absolute total normalcy. If your father asks for money, you send it. If your mother insults you, you swallow it. You cannot change your routine by a single degree. I can do that, I promised. Robert spent the next hour helping me think about the case in the same disciplined way I approached a difficult reconciliation. We separated what I knew from what I could prove. My memory of never signing the loan mattered, but the electronic timestamp network, origin disbursement trail, and my work calendar mattered more. My anger about the Tesla mattered to me, but the bank would care that the proceeds of a debt in my name went directly to purchases I neither authorized nor controlled. Jonathan made me repeat the rule I would follow until they were ready: do not warn the people whose conduct you are documenting. I wrote it at the top of the legal pad Robert had given me. Beneath it I listed the facts that could not be argued away: the loan, the forged signature, the 2 disbursements, my alibi, and the trust. Seeing them in a neat column steadied me. My family had always relied on overwhelming me emotionally until I stopped asking questions. Jonathan and Robert were teaching me to do the opposite, to slow everything down, until every claim had to stand beside a document. That Sunday, the mandatory weekly family dinner arrived at my parents' $13 million mansion. I parked my 12-year-old Honda Civic on the street far away from the grand circular driveway. Chloe's brand-new jet black Tesla Model S Plaid was parked directly in front of the massive oak double doors, gleaming aggressively in the afternoon sun. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the luxury vehicle my father had illegally purchased using my stolen identity. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my cheap clearance sweater, and walked up the long stone pathway. I pushed open the heavy front door. The house smelled of expensive catering and fresh lilies. I carried a plastic grocery bag containing a store-bought potato salad. It was the only contribution my mother allowed me to bring, constantly reminding me that my cooking was not up to their refined standards. I walked into the massive open-concept kitchen. The countertops were sprawling slabs of imported Italian marble. My mother Susan was standing by the oversized kitchen island, pouring an expensive Cabernet into oversized crystal glasses. She wore a pristine white cashmere sweater and diamond stud earrings. "You are late, Claire," my mother said, not bothering to look up from her pouring. "We told you dinner was at 5. It is 5:15. "Traffic was heavy on the highway, Mom," I said smoothly, keeping my voice entirely neutral. I set the plastic grocery bag on the marble counter. She finally looked up, her eyes immediately darting to the plastic bag. A look of profound distaste washed over her powdered face. "Please take that directly out of the plastic and put it in a proper ceramic serving bowl, Claire. Jared's parents might drop by for dessert later, and I absolutely will not have cheap grocery store bags sitting on my counters." "I will take care of it right now, Mom," I replied obediently. I opened the cabinet, retrieved a heavy ceramic bowl, and began transferring the potato salad. My mother took a sip of her wine and leaned against the island, watching me work with a critical eye. "Your father mentioned you did not call the bank to expedite the property tax wire transfer like I explicitly asked you to do at the graduation party," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of sharp accusation. I placed the plastic container in the recycling bin. "I did call them, Mom. The bank manager said the funds would clear by tomorrow morning at the absolute latest. I transferred $3,000 just like we agreed. It is exhausting having to constantly remind you of these things, Claire." My mother sighed heavily, pressing 2 fingers to her temples, as if my mere presence was triggering a massive migraine. "We are dealing with so much stress right now trying to finalize the details for Chloe's country club wedding. The floral budget alone has doubled. We simply cannot have you dragging your feet on your monthly contributions when our medical debts are still hanging over our heads." The lie rolled off her tongue with absolute terrifying perfection. She did not blink. She did not hesitate. She looked me right in the eyes and demanded my money to fund Chloe's lavish wedding while expertly using her fake medical condition as a weapon. 3 weeks ago, the sheer guilt of her words would have crushed me. Today, knowing the absolute truth, it took every ounce of my willpower not to laugh in her face. "I am sorry to add to your stress, Mom," I said, playing my assigned role flawlessly. "I will make sure the next transfer happens faster." Just then, loud laughter echoed from the hallway. Chloe and Jared walked into the kitchen, arms wrapped around each other. Chloe looked radiant in a designer silk blouse. Jared wore a casual but incredibly expensive polo shirt, his smug face glowing with arrogant satisfaction. "There is our favorite little bookkeeper," Jared announced loudly, grabbing a crystal wine glass from the counter. He took a large gulp and smacked his lips. "I have to tell you, Claire, your father is an absolute genius." "Oh," I asked, turning to face him. Chloe stepped forward, holding up a shiny black key fob. She pressed a button and the Tesla outside chirped loudly. "Dad just showed us the final paperwork for the car. He negotiated an incredible cash deal with the dealership. No financing, no ridiculous interest rates. He just wired the money straight from his business accounts. It is amazing what you can do when you have real liquid assets." "Is that so?" I said, keeping my hands resting casually on the marble counter. "It is a beautiful car, Chloe. It drives like an absolute dream," Chloe bragged, tossing the key fob onto the counter so it landed right next to my ceramic bowl of potato salad. "You should take a ride in it sometime, Claire. Maybe it will motivate you to take on some more bookkeeping clients so you can upgrade that rolling safety hazard you parked on the street." "I will definitely keep that in mind," I replied, offering her a mild, self-deprecating smile. My father walked into the kitchen right on cue, clapping his hands together loudly. "All right, who is ready for dinner?" The caterers left the prime rib in the warming oven. He walked over to the island and kissed my mother on the cheek. He looked completely relaxed, projecting the image of a wealthy, generous patriarch providing for his successful family. He looked at me standing by the sink, and his warm smile instantly tightened into a thin, forced line. "Claire," he said sharply, "did you bring the printed ledgers for the hardware store account I asked you to balance last week?" I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out a thick stack of printed spreadsheets. "I did, Dad." I reconciled all the vendor payments and caught a few minor billing errors. "I saved you about $400 in overcharges." I handed him the stack of papers. He snatched them from my hand without a single word of thanks. He flipped casually through the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers with blatant impatience. $400 is pocket change, Claire," he scoffed, tossing the meticulously balanced ledgers onto the counter next to the wine bottles. "But I suppose at your salary that seems like a massive victory. Just make sure you file these in the home office before you leave tonight. I do not want clutter in the kitchen. I will file them immediately after dinner, Dad." We moved to the massive formal dining room. The table was set with heavy silver cutlery and crystal water goblets. I took my usual seat at the very end of the table, furthest away from the large windows overlooking the manicured gardens. Throughout the entire meal, the conversation revolved exclusively around wealth status and Chloe's upcoming wedding. Jared loudly discussed his path to becoming a senior partner at his law firm. Chloe talked endlessly about the custom silk bridesmaid dresses she was importing from Italy. My parents nodded along enthusiastically, pouring more expensive wine and laughing at Jared's terrible jokes. I sat quietly at the end of the table, cutting my prime rib into tiny methodical pieces. I did not speak unless spoken to. I absorbed their casual insults about my cheap clothes, my low-paying job, and my lack of ambition. I smiled when Jared asked me to pass the salt. I nodded sympathetically when my mother complained about the high cost of her supposed heart medication. They looked at me and saw a weak, gullible failure. They saw a woman they had successfully trained to accept their abuse and fund their luxury. They did not know Robert Stanton was quietly tracing the forged loan through banking records and electronic notary logs. They did not know Jonathan was preparing the structure that would protect my inheritance from their reach. Most of all, they did not know I understood exactly where the Tesla money had come from. I took a slow sip of ice water and let them keep mistaking silence for ignorance. I took a slow sip of my ice water. The silent war was raging all around them, and they were completely blissfully oblivious to the impending explosion. "We have a serious problem," Jonathan stated the second I answered my phone on Wednesday morning. He did not bother with pleasantries. He was calling from his secure office line, and the heavy tension in his voice made my blood run instantly cold. "Your future brother-in-law Jared has learned about your grandfather's estate. A former law school colleague of his, who works around county records, recognized your grandfather's name on the transfer cover sheet and mentioned it to Jared. He now knows the portfolio exists." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter tightly. "How much does Jared know?" "He knows the total valuation of the commercial real estate portfolio," Jonathan replied grimly. He knows it is worth $50 million, and he knows your grandfather legally bypassed your father to leave every single penny of it directly to you. Jared pulled the public cover sheets this morning. The secret is completely out, Claire. I hung up the phone and stared at the blank wall of my tiny studio apartment. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. I had known the illusion could not last forever, but I needed more time for Robert to finish compiling the federal fraud case regarding the forged loan. If my family knew I had $50 million, they would immediately demand I pay off their debts, and if I refused, they would use the fraudulent $200,000 loan to ruin me. I called Jonathan back before fear could turn into haste. He told me not to contact Jared and not to warn my parents that I knew the secret was out. Jared had learned enough to become dangerous, but not enough to know how well protected the estate could become. I told Jonathan there was one place Jared might get careless: the shared family cloud drive. 5 years earlier, when my father complained that paper files were slowing his business down, I had built the digital filing system myself and kept the master administrator access because I still balanced several of his accounts. Jared treated me like someone who could barely use a calculator. If he drafted anything for my parents, he would never imagine I could see the version history behind it. Jonathan told me to check the drive, preserve anything relevant, and call him the moment I found proof. I opened my laptop. The old machine took its usual painful minute to wake, but my hands were steady. I logged into the family cloud account with the administrator credentials I had created years earlier. A new folder sat near the top of the directory. It had been created less than 2 hours before and was labeled Estate Planning Private. The name alone tightened every muscle in my shoulders. I downloaded a complete copy of the folder before opening a single file, preserving the timestamps and the version history exactly as they existed. Then I clicked on the document titled Emergency Conservatorship Petition Draft 1. I double-clicked the folder. Inside was a single word processing document titled Emergency Conservatorship Petition Draft 1. I downloaded the file to my local hard drive before opening it. I wanted a permanent digital copy securely in my possession before they could edit or delete it. I opened the document and began to read. The legal jargon was dense and aggressive, but the malicious intent was crystal clear. Jared had drafted a formal request to the state court asking a judge to strip me of all my legal rights. The petition claimed I was suffering from severe psychological distress and extreme financial incompetence. Jared had actually written a section detailing my cheap apartment and my meager bookkeeping income. He used my poverty as legal evidence that I lacked the basic cognitive ability to manage any significant assets. He claimed my sudden inheritance of $50 million would trigger a complete mental breakdown. He requested that the court immediately appoint my father as my permanent financial guardian to protect the estate from my supposed delusions. The version history was even worse than the polished draft. Jared had left tracked notes explaining which parts of my life should be framed as evidence of incapacity: my $40,000 bookkeeping income, my rented studio, my old Honda, the anxiety my mother had falsely claimed I suffered in crowds, and the fact that I had never managed a large personal investment account. Other edits instructed my parents to describe ordinary obedience as dependence and quietness as instability. One note stated that Richard should be requested as the financial conservator because he already understood the family real estate business and could move quickly once control was granted. Another reminded them to characterize my inheritance as a sudden psychological shock. The comments made the deception unmistakable. This was not a worried family asking a court for protection. It was a coordinated attempt to manufacture incompetence, so my father could take control of assets that legally belonged to me. I went through the file again without changing so much as a comma. I saved the original download, a second read-only copy, and screenshots of the version history, so there would be a clear record of what existed before anyone realized I had seen it. The petition was insulting, but the technical trail behind it was more useful than the insults themselves. Jared had assumed the words on the page would become reality simply because he knew how to format them like law. He had written about my modest income as if it proved incompetence, my small apartment as if it proved incapacity, and my quiet behavior at family gatherings as if silence were a diagnosis. None of those things showed I could not manage money. In fact, my entire adult life showed the opposite. I had managed on almost nothing because they kept taking the rest. I felt the old urge to defend myself, sentence by sentence, to explain who I really was to people committed to misunderstanding me. Then I stopped. I did not need to persuade Jared. I needed to preserve what he had done. For once, their contempt for me was not merely painful. It was evidence. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply pressed print. My cheap desk printer hummed to life, slowly spitting out page after page of undeniable proof. I gathered the warm papers, slid them into a thick manila envelope, and grabbed my car keys. I was sitting in Jonathan's downtown law office before the sun even came up the next morning. Jonathan poured 2 cups of black coffee from a silver carafe on his mahogany credenza. He handed me a ceramic mug and sat down across from me at the large conference table. I slid the manila envelope across the polished wood. Jonathan pulled out the printed pages and began to read. The room was completely silent except for the crisp sound of paper turning. I watched his expression shift from polite professional interest to cold, absolute fury. "This is not just aggressive legal strategy," Jonathan said softly, his eyes scanning the final page of Jared's notes. "This is a severe ethical violation and an attempted abuse of the court process. Your future brother-in-law is risking his law license to get his hands on this money. They want to file the petition by Friday morning," I told him, taking a sip of my bitter coffee. "They want to secure an emergency ex parte order to freeze the trust accounts before I even know what is happening. If they get a judge to sign this, my father gets total control of the $50 million. Jonathan set the papers down and leaned forward. He folded his hands tightly on the table. "They are not going to get control of a single dime, Claire. We are establishing the blind corporate trust today. We are going to make that money legally untouchable." "How does it work?" I asked. "Your grandfather left the estate to you," Jonathan explained. "But you do not have to hold those assets in your personal name. We are going to create a holding company structured as a blind trust. The company will be registered in Delaware, where corporate privacy laws are absolute. The holding company will officially own the commercial real estate portfolio and the $12 million in liquid assets. You will be the sole voting shareholder and the ultimate beneficiary. But your name will not appear on any public county registry or real estate deed in this state. So when Jared searches the public records on Friday, what will he find?" I asked. "He will find no personal deed or liquid account. He can simply seize," Jonathan said. "The distributed assets will sit inside the corporate trust structure rather than in your individual name. That will keep Richard from gaining direct control merely by filing a rushed petition, and I will be ready to challenge any conservatorship request with the trust documents and the evidence you recovered. To your family, you will still look like Claire, the local bookkeeper, with a 12-year-old car and a rented studio apartment. They can file papers. They cannot reach the $50 million. Jonathan retrieved the trust establishment binders himself and placed them in front of me beside a heavy metal pen. Every page was tabbed, every signature line marked. He told me to read slowly and ask about anything I did not understand. I spent the next 2 hours reading through the complex corporate structures and signing my name on dozens of signature lines. Every time I signed a page, I thought about my father. I thought about how he had carelessly forged my signature on that fraudulent $200,000 loan to buy Chloe a luxury car. He had used my name as a weapon to destroy my credit and trap me in debt. Now I was using my own authentic signature to build an impenetrable fortress around my true wealth. I signed the final page and pushed the binder back to Jonathan. "The trust is active," Jonathan announced, stamping the documents with his official notary seal. "I will wire the $12 million into the new corporate accounts within the hour. The real estate deeds will be quietly transferred to the Delaware Holding Company by this afternoon. Your grandfather's empire is now completely safe. Now we go on the offensive," I said, reaching into my canvas work tote. I pulled out the silver USB drive containing all the digital metadata I had pulled from the shared cloud network. I placed it on the table right next to Jared's printed petition. I need to make sure Jared can never practice law again. I need undeniable proof of his ethical violations, so he cannot use his legal license to attack me or anyone else ever again. Jonathan plugged the silver drive into his sleek tablet. "We need to verify the digital fingerprints on that document," he said, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. "If we can prove Jared drafted a fraudulent legal petition using his law firm's resources, the State Bar Association will disbar him before he even knows what hit him." I opened my own laptop and pulled up the network access logs. When Jared saved the document to the cloud drive, he left a massive digital trail, I explained, pointing to a long string of numbers on my screen. He did not write this petition from his home computer. Look at this IP address. It is registered directly to his corporate law firm downtown. He used his firm's secure network and their proprietary legal software to draft a fraudulent document intended to steal $50 million from his own sister-in-law. Jonathan reviewed the data logs and let out a low whistle. He used company time and company software to facilitate a crime. His senior partners will completely destroy him to protect the firm's reputation. The version logs completed the chain. They showed Jared creating the petition on his law firm's network, revising the false allegations, and saving successive drafts to my family's private folder. The document metadata identified his professional account as the author. The tracked comments showed that the allegations were being shaped to obtain control of my inheritance, rather than to address any genuine incapacity. Jonathan copied the files, the access logs, and the preserved version history onto an evidence drive and sealed it in his case file. He told me the package was strong enough for a formal state bar complaint seeking severe professional discipline, including disbarment. "We do not file the bar complaint yet," I said firmly. "Why not?" Jonathan asked. "We have enough to stop Jared's filing now." "Because if we expose Jared today, my parents will panic," I explained, closing my laptop. "They will realize the $50 million is out of their reach, and they may deliberately stop servicing the fraudulent $200,000 loan they placed in my name." Robert Stanton still needed the final banking records and digital authentication, tying my father's forged signature to his office. I was not going to give them a chance to turn that debt into a weapon before our proof was complete. We had to let them believe they still had room to maneuver until the bank fraud case was ready. Jonathan nodded slowly, a fierce smile spreading across his face. "You want to execute the entire family all at once. I want to tear their empire down to the foundations," I agreed. "Chloe's massive country club wedding is a little over 2 weeks away. My parents have invited 300 of their wealthiest friends and business partners. They plan to flaunt their stolen money and celebrate Jared as the brilliant lawyer who secured their legacy." Jonathan understood immediately. "We wait for the wedding. We wait for the wedding," I confirmed. "You hold on to this digital evidence. You prepare the disbarment filings for the State Bar Association. We keep the blind trust completely hidden. I will go back to my studio apartment and continue playing the pathetic dumb sister who cannot figure out a calculator." Jonathan packed the documents and the silver flash drive into a secure leather briefcase. "You are playing a very dangerous game of chess, Claire. You have to sit across the dinner table from these people for the next 14 days, knowing they are actively trying to destroy your life. You cannot show a single ounce of anger. You cannot let the mask slip for a second." "They taught me how to be invisible," I said quietly, picking up my empty coffee mug. "I spent 7 years hiding in the shadows so they could shine in the spotlight. I know exactly how to play my part." I walked out of Jonathan's office and stepped into the bright morning sunlight. The downtown streets were bustling with people rushing to work. I walked toward my 12-year-old Honda Civic parked at a cheap meter down the block. My phone buzzed in my canvas tote bag. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mother. "Claire, we need you to come over on Sunday to help Chloe address her wedding invitations. Wear something presentable for once. Jared's parents might stop by." I stared at the harsh, demanding words glowing on my screen. Before the graduation party, that message would have filled me with heavy, suffocating guilt. I would have rushed over and spent 6 hours writing out perfect calligraphy while they drank expensive wine and ignored me. Today, the message just felt incredibly pathetic. I typed my response with steady, unwavering fingers. "I will be there on Sunday, Mom. I cannot wait to help celebrate Chloe and Jared." I hit send and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I started the engine and merged into the heavy morning traffic. The blind trust was fully established. The $50 million empire was locked securely away under my total control. The evidence of Jared's conservatorship scheme was sitting safely in a lawyer's vault. The silent war had moved into its final devastating phase, and my family was still blindly marching forward directly into the crosshairs of their own destruction. I sat at my scratched kitchen table on the first day of the month, opened my secure banking application, and stared directly at the scheduled automatic transfer, $3,000. Every 30 days for the past 7 years, that exact amount had vanished from my meager checking account to fund their perfect wealthy illusion. I took a deep, steadying breath. My finger hovered over the glowing cancel button on the bright screen. I did not feel a single ounce of hesitation, obligation, or guilt. I pressed it. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen confirming the recurring payment was permanently deleted. The relief that washed over my entire body was absolute and physical. For the first time in my adult life, I was keeping my own hard-earned money. But this was not just about saving my modest salary. This was the highly calculated activation of a massive financial bomb. I closed my cheap laptop and drove directly to Jonathan's downtown law firm. Robert Stanton, the ruthless forensic accountant, was already waiting for me in the large mahogany conference room. He had a thick stack of federal reporting documents spread across the polished table. The morning light caught the sharp, serious angles of his face as he reviewed the banking ledgers. "The trap is officially set," I told them as I took my seat. "The automatic transfer is canceled. They are not getting a single dime from me ever again." Robert smiled, a sharp, clinical expression that radiated pure competence. "Perfect timing, Claire. Now we initiate the federal response." He handed me a heavy silver pen and pointed to the first document. It was a formal identity theft affidavit directed to the federal banking authorities. Because my father Richard had forged my signature to take out that massive $200,000 equity loan on the commercial warehouse. It was not just a simple family dispute. It was a severe, undeniable federal crime. He had crossed state lines electronically to secure the funds using my Social Security number. I signed my real, authentic name at the bottom of the sworn affidavit. I legally reported the loan as identity theft to the federal authorities. The contrast between that signature and the one my father had forged stayed with me. Mine was ordinary, controlled familiar, the same small, careful signature I had used on client reconciliations and apartment leases for years. I looked at it for a long second before sliding the affidavit back across the table. There was no dramatic sound, no cheering crowd, no visible collapse of my parents' world, just ink on paper. Yet it was the first financial decision of my adult life that put my protection ahead of their comfort. Canceling the transfer had ended my voluntary support. Filing the affidavit did something deeper. It rejected the legal burden Richard had tried to place on me without my consent. I understood that the investigation would have to follow evidence, not my desire for revenge, and that was exactly what I wanted. I did not need anyone to punish my family because I was angry. I needed the records examined until the truth became impossible to hide. "What happens now?" I asked, sliding the signed papers back across the long table to Robert. "Now the automated banking systems take over completely," Robert explained smoothly, tapping the paperwork. "Your parents have been secretly using your monthly $3,000 transfer to quietly make the minimum payments on that fraudulent loan. Without your cash injection today, they will immediately default on the upcoming payment. The bank's internal fraud department will instantly cross-reference the missed payment with this federal identity theft affidavit we are filing right now." Jonathan leaned forward, folding his hands together tightly. "The federal authorities do not move slowly when a major banking institution reports a $200,000 fraudulent loan. They are going to freeze your father's commercial accounts pending a full, invasive investigation. Your parents are suddenly facing federal bank fraud charges, and they are hemorrhaging money just weeks before Chloe's $150,000 country club wedding." I finished his thought, realizing the absolute devastating perfection of the timing. "Exactly," Jonathan said, a fierce gleam in his intelligent eyes. "They have luxury vendors demanding massive final payments for the imported flowers, the custom catering, and the expensive string quartet. They are completely relying on their liquid cash flow to maintain their wealthy, perfect image for high society. When the federal investigators freeze those accounts, they are going to panic in a way they never have before." The first frantic phone call came exactly 5 days later. I was sitting in my freezing studio apartment eating a simple bowl of vegetable soup when my cell phone began to vibrate aggressively on the laminate counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times before answering, keeping my voice soft, compliant, and entirely clueless. "Hello, Mom." "Claire, what on earth is wrong with your bank?" My mother's voice was shrill, vibrating with barely contained panic and furious entitlement. "The monthly wire transfer did not clear. Your father checked the joint account this morning and the money is simply not there. You told me you expedited it." I stared at the peeling paint on my apartment wall, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction. "Oh, I am so sorry, Mom. I did call the bank, but my freelance clients have been really late paying my invoices this month. I do not have the funds to cover the transfer right now." "You do not have the funds!" She literally screamed into the receiver. Claire, this is completely unacceptable. You know we are drowning in terrible medical debts. You know we rely on that money to keep the family house out of foreclosure. You have to borrow it immediately. Take out a payday loan if you have to. I cannot get approved for a loan. Mom, I lied smoothly, delivering the first psychological blow. My credit score took a strange, massive hit recently. I am trying to figure out why. I think someone might have opened a credit line in my name. There was a sudden dead silence on the line. I could practically hear her heart stop beating. She covered the receiver with her hand, but I could still hear her muffled, frantic voice speaking to my father in the background. She is saying her credit took a hit, Richard. What if the bank is looking at the warehouse loan? My father grabbed the phone away from her. His voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant, booming confidence. He sounded breathless and terrified. Claire, listen to me very carefully. Do not call anyone about your credit score. Do not call the bank. Do you understand me? I will have my private corporate accountant look into it for you. Just get me that $3,000 by Friday. We are dealing with some unexpected delays on a commercial property, and we need the liquid cash right now. I will do my absolute best, Dad, I promised, my voice dripping with fake submission and innocent concern. I hung up the phone and smiled in the quiet darkness of my apartment. They were absolutely terrified. Over the next several days, the situation escalated rapidly behind the closed doors of their pristine mansion. Robert Stanton kept me constantly updated on the federal investigation's quiet progress. The massive wealth management bank had officially flagged the $200,000 loan as fraudulent, because my father had arrogantly used his own corporate internet protocol address to electronically forge my signature. The digital forensic trail led directly to his primary real estate office downtown. Federal investigators had quietly issued grand jury subpoenas for his business banking records. My parents were completely trapped in a suffocating nightmare of their own making. They were facing federal bank fraud charges while trying to maintain the illusion of infinite wealth. My sister, completely oblivious to the impending legal destruction rushing toward her perfect life, continued to flaunt her stolen luxury. Chloe called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice bubbling with arrogant excitement and casual demands. Claire, I need you to run to the downtown boutique and pick up my custom silk bridesmaid robes. They are ready early, and I do not want them sitting in the store. I am working, Chloe, I said quietly, reviewing the blind trust documents Jonathan had sent me. I have 3 ledgers to balance by tonight. Just take an hour off, she demanded, sighing heavily into the phone, as if my job was merely a hobby. Jared and I are way too busy meeting with the country club event coordinator. They are demanding the final catering payment in cash, and Dad is being super weird about the bank transfers today. Just do this one tiny thing for me. Dad is having bank trouble, I asked, innocently baiting the hook to see exactly how far the bleeding had gone. Yes, it is super annoying, Chloe complained bitterly. He said his corporate accounts are temporarily frozen because of some stupid administrative audit. He is completely stressing out Mom. She has been crying in the kitchen all morning because the florist is threatening to cancel the imported white orchids if they do not get their $75,000 deposit by tomorrow afternoon. Just pick up the robes, Claire. I will go get them, I said, hanging up the phone. The absolute irony was staggering. They were hemorrhaging money just weeks before Chloe's $150,000 country club wedding. The federal freeze on their accounts was working exactly as Jonathan had predicted. My father could not access his stolen wealth. He could not leverage his commercial properties. He could not even pay the florists for his golden daughter's perfect day. The luxurious facade they had built using my stolen wages was violently cracking. And the absolute best part was that they could not ask me for help without exposing their own massive federal crimes. They were suffocating in silence, bleeding out financially, while having to smile for their wealthy society friends. On Sunday, I attended the mandatory family dinner as if absolutely nothing had changed. I drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic to their massive estate and parked on the street far away from Chloe's shiny new Tesla. When I walked into the grand kitchen, carrying my usual cheap plastic container of potato salad, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. My mother was standing by the sprawling marble island, gripping a glass of cheap, unbranded wine. The expensive vintage bottles they usually flaunted were noticeably absent. Her face was pale drawn and completely lacking its usual arrogant powder. My father was pacing violently back and forth across the hardwood floor, shouting into his cell phone. "I am telling you, I did not authorize a freeze on those assets," he barked into the receiver, his face turning a dangerous, unhealthy shade of red. "You tell the fraud department to release my funds immediately. I have a wedding to pay for. Do you know who I am?" He listened for a long moment, the color rapidly draining from his face, until he looked completely gray and hollow. He slowly lowered the phone and ended the call with trembling fingers. "Richard, what did the bank manager say?" My mother asked, her voice trembling with absolute terror. My father looked at her, completely ignoring my quiet presence by the doorway. "The federal authorities have officially taken over the investigation. They are sending agents to the office tomorrow morning to review the equity loan files and seize the hard drives." My mother let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She dropped her wine glass. It shattered into a dozen sharp pieces against the expensive tile floor, splashing red liquid everywhere like blood. She sank to her knees, burying her face in her trembling hands, sobbing openly. I stood quietly in this doorway. I watched them realize that their entire empire was burning to the ground. They had spent 7 years stealing my youth, my money, and my future to fund their perfect illusion. They had forged my signature and tried to trap me in a financial cage. They had prepared a court petition designed to declare me mentally incompetent just to steal my grandfather's inheritance. Now they were standing in the ashes of their own endless greed. "Oh no," I said softly, rushing forward with a handful of paper towels, playing my assigned role of the naive, helpful daughter flawlessly. "Mom, let me clean that up for you. You sit down. You look terribly stressed." My mother just stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. She had absolutely no idea that the quiet daughter kneeling on her floor wiping up spilled wine was the exact architect of her absolute destruction. The following weekend, the warm afternoon sun poured through the massive stained glass windows of the Oak Creek Country Club as I walked into my sister's wedding reception. The air conditioning was running at full blast, but the grand ballroom still felt entirely suffocating. I walked past the velvet ropes and found my assigned seat at table 43, the exact same dark corner by the swinging kitchen doors where I had been placed during her graduation party. This time, however, I did not feel small. I did not feel humiliated. I felt the cold, heavy weight of absolute certainty settling into my bones. The silent war was over, and today was the day of public execution. I let myself look around table 43 before the speeches began. The same kitchen doors swung behind me. The same narrow strip of ballroom wall blocked part of my view. My water glass looked almost identical to the one I had held on graduation night. The seating assignment was meant to remind me of my place, and in a strange way, it did just not the place they intended. This was where I had learned the truth. This was where a sealed envelope had interrupted the story my parents had written for me. I no longer needed a better table to prove I belonged in the room. I had spent weeks securing the trust, preserving Jared's files, working with Robert on the bank evidence, and waiting while my parents' own choices closed around them. Nothing about my power depended on where Susan had printed my name on a seating chart. So I sat there quietly and watched the room with the patience of someone waiting for a balance sheet to finish reconciling. The ballroom was a staggering display of stolen wealth. My parents had spent $150,000 to secure the absolute best for their golden daughter. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the crystal chandeliers, catching the light and casting soft shadows across the pristine white silk tablecloths. A 12-piece string quartet played bright classical music in the far corner. 300 upper-crust guests, including prominent local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and high-society church elders, mingled around the open bars. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated tirelessly, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with expensive caviar, artisan cheeses, and vintage champagne. It was a flawless, perfect aesthetic, funded entirely by federal bank fraud and my stolen youth. I sat quietly in my simple gray dress, sipping a glass of plain ice water, and watched the grand illusion unfold. At the very front of the room, elevated on a raised platform, sat the massive sweetheart table. Chloe sat right in the center, radiating arrogant triumph in a custom silk designer wedding gown dripping with hand-sewn pearls. Jared sat beside her in a tailored black tuxedo, looking incredibly smug as he raised his expensive crystal champagne flute to the business partners walking past. My mother Susan fluttered around the head table in a glittering silver designer gown. She was laughing loudly, touching the arms of wealthy investors, playing the role of the perfect devoted matriarch. My father Richard stood near a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a swan, shaking hands and accepting endless congratulations on a beautiful wedding. They looked absolutely perfect. They had absolutely no idea the federal authorities were already preparing to seize their assets, and they certainly did not know that Jonathan was waiting in the parking lot with a briefcase full of destruction. The string quartet slowly faded out their music as the dinner plates were cleared away by a small army of busboys. The loud buzzing conversation in the massive room grew quiet with polite anticipation. My father walked up the 3 wooden steps onto the elevated stage in the center of the ballroom. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, cleared his throat, and grabbed the microphone from the polished brass stand. He tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, ringing sound echoed clearly through the vast space, commanding total absolute attention from the 300 wealthy guests. "Thank you all for being here on this truly magnificent evening," my father began. His booming voice rolled over the quiet crowd, dripping with heavy, unfiltered arrogance. "Tonight we are not just celebrating a beautiful marriage between 2 remarkable young people. We are celebrating the merging of 2 incredible families. We are celebrating the absolute continuation of a mighty, untouchable legacy." The crowd murmured politely, hanging on his every single word. Jared nodded in firm agreement, looking extremely satisfied with himself as he took a sip of his wine. Chloe smiled brightly, placing her hand delicately over Jared's arm for the professional photographer snapping photos near the stage. "When I look at Chloe and Jared sitting here tonight," my father continued, pacing slowly and deliberately across the wooden stage, "I see the bright future of our family name. I see unmatched success, sharp intelligence, and the kind of fierce, unstoppable ambition that builds massive empires. My wife and I have worked tirelessly for decades to establish our wealth and our high standing in this community. We built our commercial real estate business from the ground up through sheer determination, late nights, and financial brilliance. We built a foundation of absolute perfection and security, so our golden daughter could have the world handed to her on a silver platter." My father stopped pacing and looked directly at Chloe, his chest puffing out with false pride. "We made sacrifices so you would never have to, sweetheart. We carried the heavy burdens so you could fly. And today, seeing you marry a brilliant legal mind like Jared, I know that our family empire is in the absolute best hands possible." He turned back to the crowd and raised his crystal glass high in the air. The bright spotlight caught the expensive wine, making it glow a deep, rich red. To Chloe and Jared, he announced loudly, his voice filling the silent room, "May your future be as rich, as secure, and as perfectly planned as the legacy we have built for you." The 300 guests instantly erupted into thunderous applause. People pushed back their heavy wooden chairs and stood up to cheer wildly. Chloe wiped a fake delicate tear from her perfectly powdered cheek. Jared raised his own glass toward my father, his smile wide and deeply greedy. My mother stood up in the front row and clapped enthusiastically, beaming with pride. I did not clap. I did not stand. I reached into my canvas tote bag resting on the floor and pulled out my cell phone. I opened my messages and sent a single text to Jonathan. The message simply said, "Now." I stood up from my wooden chair. I smoothed the front of my simple gray dress. The heavy mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom swung open with a loud, echoing thud. The wealthy guests standing near the entrance turned around in confusion, their applause faltering. Jonathan walked right through the doors. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. He was carrying a massive, thick leather briefcase in his right hand. He walked down the center aisle with the cold, undeniable authority of a man who held absolutely all the power in the room. He did not look at the expensive flowers or the ice sculptures. He looked directly at me and nodded once. I stepped away from table 43 and began walking down the center aisle to meet him. The thunderous applause was slowly dying down into confused murmurs as people noticed Jonathan marching forward and then noticed me walking directly toward the head table. My father was still standing on the elevated stage holding his wine glass, a wide, arrogant smile plastered across his face. He saw me walking toward him, and his smile instantly tightened into a thin line of profound, angry irritation. He thought I was coming up to make a fool of myself. He thought I was going to ruin his perfect aesthetic in front of his important business partners. I walked directly up the 3 wooden steps onto the stage. I did not stop. I did not ask for permission. I walked right up to my father, reached out, and took the microphone right out of his hand. His fingers gripped the cool metal tightly for a split second before pure shock forced him to let go. "Claire, "What on earth are you doing?" my father hissed under his breath, his eyes wide with panic. "Get off this stage right now before you embarrass us." I ignored him completely. I turned to face the 300 guests. The room was absolutely silent now. Every single eye in the massive ballroom was glued directly to me. Jonathan stopped at the bottom of the stage steps. He opened his heavy leather briefcase with a sharp, loud click. He reached inside, pulled out 2 extremely thick stacks of official legal paper, and handed them up to me. I took them, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute justice in my hands. "My father talked a lot about legacy tonight," I said into the microphone. My voice did not shake. It rang clear, cold, and steady, amplified perfectly across the vast space. He talked about building an empire through sheer determination and financial brilliance. But he conveniently forgot to mention exactly how he funded this incredible legacy. My mother stood up from her front row table. Her face was turning a dangerous, sickly shade of pale. "Claire, stop this instantly," she demanded, her voice shrill and vibrating with terror. "You are ruining your sister's wedding." "I am not going to stop, Mom," I said, looking right into her terrified eyes. "For 7 long years, I worked 60-hour weeks as a freelance bookkeeper. I lived in a freezing, drafty studio apartment and ate canned beans because my parents looked me in the eyes and told me they were drowning in insurmountable medical debts. I sent them $3,000 every single month to keep this family from losing their home to foreclosure. I gave up my college savings, my entire 20s, and my personal freedom because I truly believed I was saving my mother's life." Loud gasps echoed from the back of the room. Wealthy business partners exchanged horrified glances. The silence in the ballroom became incredibly heavy and completely suffocating. But there were absolutely no medical debts. I continued, my voice growing stronger and harder with every single word. "My mother is perfectly healthy. The money I bled for the money I gave them out of pure love and family trust was directly deposited into a luxury investment account to pay for European vacations and designer clothes." I pulled a thick stack of legal documents from my bag, just as I had planned, presenting the undeniable facts of their financial exploitation to the entire room. Chloe stood up abruptly from the sweetheart table, knocking over her water glass. "You are lying!" she shouted, her perfect face twisting with sudden ugly rage. "You are just jealous because I am successful and you are a failure." I turned to look at my golden sister. "I am not lying, Chloe," I replied calmly. And the financial abuse did not stop with my stolen wages. I held up the first thick stack of legal papers. The heavy federal seal was stamped clearly on the very front page. "3 weeks ago," I said into the microphone, looking directly at my father. My father electronically forged my signature to take out a massive $200,000 commercial equity loan on a warehouse property. He used my clean credit and my stolen identity to secure the cash. And do you want to know exactly where that stolen money went? $140,000 went to buy the brand new luxury Tesla that Chloe is currently driving. The remaining $60,000 went to this exact country club to pay for my father's elite lifetime membership. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. People were whispering loudly, pointing directly at my father in shock. My father took a frantic step toward me, his hands raised in a desperate attempt to stop the public execution. "It is a total lie," my father yelled to the crowd, sweating profusely under the bright stage lights. "She is mentally unstable. She has anxiety. She does not know what she is saying." I turned to him and shoved the thick stack of federal indictment papers directly into his chest. He reflexively grabbed them before they hit the wooden floorboards. "Those are federal indictment papers for bank fraud and identity theft," I told him, making sure the microphone caught every single word so the entire room could hear. "The federal authorities have already frozen your commercial accounts. That is why you could not pay the florist yesterday. That is why you have been sweating and pacing all week. The federal investigators seized your office hard drives this morning. You are facing federal prison, Dad." My mother let out a loud, piercing scream. She collapsed back into her wooden chair, covering her powdered face with her shaking hands. The wealthy guests sitting near her immediately pulled their chairs away, treating her like a highly contagious disease. Jared stood up from the sweetheart table, his face red with raw, unfiltered fury. He aggressively pointed a finger at me. "You cannot do this, Claire. You have absolutely no legal standing here. I am a corporate lawyer and I will personally sue you for defamation. I will bury you in court for ruining my wedding." I smiled at Jared. It was a cold, absolute, terrifying smile. I walked over to the edge of the stage and looked down at him. I held up the second thick stack of legal papers. "You are not going to bury anyone, Jared," I said clearly. When you found out that my late grandfather legally bypassed my father and left a $50 million commercial real estate empire entirely to me in a highly protected blind trust, you got incredibly greedy. You drafted a fraudulent legal petition to place me under a strict financial conservatorship. Jared froze completely. The angry color instantly drained from his smug face, leaving him looking sickly white. He looked exactly like a man who realized he had just stepped on a live landmine. You fabricated a case that I was mentally unstable and financially incompetent. I continued, my voice carrying through the ballroom. You used my low bookkeeping income, my rented apartment, my old car, and my mother's invented stories about anxiety as supposed proof that I could not manage wealth. You asked the court to put my father in control so the family could reach my grandfather's $50 million estate. And you were arrogant enough to draft the petition on your corporate law firm's network and save the working copies to the family cloud drive I built. I dropped the thick stack of papers directly onto the white silk of his sweetheart table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying smack right next to his half-empty champagne flute. Those are formal state bar disciplinary filings, I announced, letting the papers land in front of Jared. I preserved your petition drafts, the version history, the tracked comments, and the network metadata showing exactly where the documents were created. Jonathan submitted the disciplinary filing seeking your disbarment this morning after the bank fraud evidence against my father was secured. Your senior partners have been notified. You are not standing here as the brilliant lawyer who saved this family's legacy. You are standing here facing the loss of your law license for trying to use the courts to steal my inheritance. Jared stared blankly at the papers on his table. His mouth opened and closed, but absolutely no sound came out. Chloe grabbed his arm, shaking him desperately. Jared, tell them she is lying. Chloe begged, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. Tell everyone it is a massive mistake. Jared did not look at her. He just stared at the disbarment papers, realizing his entire career, his reputation, and his freedom were completely and utterly destroyed. The room had heard enough to understand that Jared's career was in danger, but I was not finished. The legal filings explained the crimes. They did not yet explain why my family had been so desperate to control me. I turned back toward Jonathan. He reached into the briefcase again and handed me the cream envelope I had first opened in the country club bathroom, along with the certified trust documents prepared for the final reveal. My father saw the envelope and went completely still. My grandfather did not die bankrupt, I announced to the massive room. My voice echoed off the high vaulted ceilings, cutting cleanly through the heavy, suffocating silence. He did not lose his commercial real estate empire in reckless, poorly planned investments. That was a lie my parents invented to hide their own failures. He transferred every single property and every single liquid asset into a highly protected blind corporate trust to keep it safely away from my father. I unfolded the delicate letter with deliberate slowness. My father tried to lunge forward to grab the paper from my hands, but his legs seemed to give out entirely under the sheer, unfiltered panic taking over his body. He stumbled awkwardly and caught himself hard on the sharp edge of the wooden podium. I stepped gracefully out of his reach, smoothing the creases of the letter. I want you all to hear his exact words, I said, looking out at the 300 guests sitting frozen in their seats. I cleared my throat and read the letter aloud. My dearest Claire, I know your father thinks he is an incredibly clever man. He thinks he managed to fool polite society with his dramatic stories of financial ruin and insurmountable medical debts. But I hired a private investigator 5 years ago. I saw the hidden bank transfers. I knew that your parents were exploiting your labor to fund their lavish lifestyle and your sister's Ivy League education and the expensive costs her scholarship did not cover. I knew they were draining your meager income and telling you it was for life-saving medical emergencies. You were working yourself to the bone for them, while they casually used your stolen money to pay for luxury vacations to Italy and elite country club dues. A loud collective gasp rippled rapidly through the audience. Prominent church elders covered their mouths in genuine shock. Wealthy commercial real estate developers turned in their wooden chairs to look at my father with utter, undisguised disgust. I carefully folded the letter, placed it back into my pocket, and pulled out the certified banking statement Jonathan had prepared for me. Jonathan handed me one final document, a large certified presentation check prepared from the estate records marked $50 million to reflect the trust's total verified value. It was not a claim that $50 million sat in one checking account. The attached certification broke the estate down exactly as the original papers had $12 million in liquid assets and $38 million in commercial real estate. I held the check and certification high enough for the front tables to see. My grandfather left the entire $50 million estate to me, I said. He bypassed my father because he knew exactly what kind of man his son had become. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I could see people doing the arithmetic in their heads. $50 million was not merely larger than the $13 million estate Richard had bragged about at the graduation party. It exposed the scale of the lie he had told about his own father dying broke. More important, the letter explained why the money had bypassed him. I did not wave the check like a trophy. I held it steady beside the letter because the point was not that I had become richer than my family. The point was that the one person they had dismissed as incapable had been trusted with the very legacy Richard believed belonged to him. I looked toward my parents and saw that they understood the distinction. If this were only about money, they could still call me lucky. But my grandfather's decision was a judgment on character, and that was the part they could not purchase, forge, or talk their way around. My mother let out a loud, piercing wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She fell back heavily into her cushioned chair at the head table. She covered her perfectly powdered face with both hands, sobbing hysterically and rocking back and forth. But the wealthy crowd did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. They just stared at her with cold, judging eyes. The reaction from the audience was immediate and explosive. Jared's father stood up aggressively from his front row VIP table. His face was entirely red with furious indignation. He pushed his chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. He walked directly toward the elevated stage, completely ignoring the country club security guards hovering nervously near the exit doors. Richard, Jared's father, shouted his deep, booming voice, carrying easily over the rising murmurs of the stunned crowd. "Is this true? Did you electronically forge your own daughter's signature to secure a fraudulent federal loan? Did you use stolen identity money to fund this extravagant wedding and buy my new daughter-in-law a luxury car?" My father opened his mouth to defend himself, but only a pathetic, wet stammer came out. "Please, you have to listen to me. We can explain everything in my office tomorrow morning. It is a massive, terrible misunderstanding. She is highly confused." "I do not want to hear your pathetic, lying excuses," Jared's father bellowed, stepping right up to the edge of the stage. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at my trembling father. "My family has maintained an impeccable, spotless business reputation in this city for 4 generations. We entrusted you with our venture capital because we falsely believed you were an honorable, ethical man. We partnered with your commercial real estate firm based on a solid foundation of mutual trust and respect. That partnership is completely, irrevocably over. I am legally pulling every single dollar of our funding from your current downtown development projects first thing tomorrow morning. I will personally make sure that not a single reputable investor or bank in this entire state ever does business with you again. You are absolutely finished." My father looked exactly like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. He slumped heavily against the wooden podium, his arrogant, wealthy posture completely destroyed. He looked out at his elite society friends, silently begging with his eyes for anyone to intervene on his behalf. But the same people who had happily cheered and raised their expensive vintage champagne glasses for him just 10 minutes ago were now actively turning their backs in disgust. Meanwhile, total unadulterated chaos erupted at the lavish sweetheart table. Jared was staring down at the thick stack of state bar disbarment papers I had dropped right in front of him. His hands were shaking so violently that his knuckles struck his crystal champagne flute. The expensive glass tipped over, spilling bubbly liquid across the pristine white silk tablecloth and dripping steadily onto the hardwood floor. "Jared, you have to fix this right now," Chloe begged frantically. She grabbed his tuxedo sleeve, her custom designer wedding gown rustling loudly as she leaned over the spilled wine. "Tell them your sister-in-law is completely lying. Use your brilliant legal knowledge to stop her from doing this. Sue her for massive defamation right this second before my parents lose everything." Jared jerked his arm away with such brutal, unfiltered force that Chloe stumbled backward and hit the back of her chair. He stood up rapidly, knocking his own chair over in the aggressive process. He turned to face his beautiful new bride, his eyes blazing with pure, unrestrained hatred. "Are you completely out of your empty mind?" Jared screamed at her, entirely forgetting about the 300 upper-crust guests watching their bitter exchange. "Sue her. She has the petition drafts from your family cloud drive. She has the version history and the digital network logs proving I drafted them from my corporate office. She just handed the entire conservatorship scheme to the State Bar Association, along with the version history and network logs." "My legal career is collapsing, Chloe. I could lose my law license because I listened to your greedy, corrupt family." "Jared, please do not say that. We can hire a massive defense attorney." Chloe pleaded, her perfect bridal makeup completely ruined by streaming black tears of panic. "We are husband and wife now. We took our vows. We have to stick together through this." "I am absolutely not sticking with you." Jared spat, his harsh voice echoing relentlessly through the silent ballroom. "I only married you because your arrogant father explicitly promised me the keys to a $13 million real estate empire. I married you because I falsely thought you were the sole golden heir to massive, untouchable wealth. But you have absolutely nothing. Your entire glamorous life is a complete pathetic lie funded by your abused sister. I am filing for a legal annulment first thing tomorrow morning. Do not ever speak to me again." Jared did not even bother to look at his own horrified parents sitting in the front row. He reached down, grabbed his heavy leather briefcase from under the table, turned around, pushed aggressively past the frozen serving staff, and stormed out of the grand ballroom through the side kitchen exit doors. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind him with a loud final crack. Chloe let out a terrifying, blood-curdling scream that sounded like her soul was being ripped out. She collapsed dramatically onto the floor, clutching the heavy silk skirt of her expensive wedding gown, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her brand-new husband walk out on their marriage before they even had the chance to cut their $100,000 cake. The wealthy guests had finally seen enough. The grand illusion of the perfect, untouchable family was completely and utterly shattered. People began to stand up quickly from their assigned tables, scraping their wooden chairs against the floor. They hurriedly grabbed their expensive wool coats from the backs of their chairs and snatched up their designer purses. Nobody stopped to say a polite goodbye. Nobody offered a single word of sympathy or comfort to my devastated parents. The mass exodus was swift, silent, and utterly brutal. Within 10 agonizing minutes, the massive decorated ballroom was practically empty. The classical string quartet players had hastily packed their expensive instruments into velvet cases and fled out the back. The professional catering staff stood frozen by the swinging kitchen doors, completely unsure of what to do with the hundreds of lavish plates of untouched prime rib sitting on silver trays. My mother was still sitting at the head table, rocking back and forth in a frantic rhythm, weeping loudly into her hands while Chloe sobbed on the floor beside her. My father was sitting heavily on the edge of the wooden stage, with his head buried deep between his knees, gripping the federal indictment papers. I walked slowly down the wooden steps of the stage. The heavy fabric of my simple gray dress swished softly against the polished hardwood floor. I stopped directly in front of my father. He slowly raised his heavy head. His eyes were completely bloodshot, wet with tears, and entirely devoid of their usual arrogant, booming spark. "You won, Claire," my father whispered hoarsely. His voice sounded like it was coming from a broken, dying machine. "You took absolutely everything from us. You publicly destroyed our social standing in this city. You stripped us of our life assets. Are you finally happy now?" I looked down at the man who had cruelly called me the dumb one in front of hundreds of people. I looked at the man who had stolen my youth, drained my bank accounts, and forged my legal signature to buy his status. "I did not take anything from you," I replied evenly, my voice completely devoid of hot anger or lingering sorrow. "I simply revealed the absolute truth to the people you were lying to. You actively destroyed your own empire the exact moment you decided to build it on a foundation of endless greed and financial exploitation. You thought I was weak and stupid because I stayed quiet and did exactly what you asked. You completely mistook my unconditional family love for pathetic gullibility." My mother lifted her tear-streaked head from her hands. "Claire, please," she begged, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. "We are still your family. Blood is thicker than water. We can fix this terrible mess. Just give us time to make it right." I turned my head to look at her powdered, ruined face. "You are absolutely not my family," I said quietly but firmly. "You are just the people who happen to share my biological blood. You used me as a human shield to protect your own vanity and fund your endless luxury. I spent 7 long years trying to save you from a terrible crisis that never even existed. I am entirely done playing my assigned part in your sick, abusive game." I did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic response. I turned my back on my ruined parents and my sobbing, abandoned sister. I walked with my head held high down the long, carpeted center aisle of the grand ballroom. My steady footsteps echoed loudly in the vast empty space. I pushed firmly through the heavy front glass doors of the country club and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. The valet parking lot was completely chaotic as hundreds of wealthy guests scrambled aggressively to retrieve their luxury vehicles and escape the toxic scene of the massive scandal. But right at the front of the circular stone driveway, away from the pushing crowds, Jonathan was waiting patiently for me. He stood tall next to a sleek, waiting black town car. The engine was running quietly, purring in the cool air. He reached out and opened the heavy back door as I approached. "Are you all right?" Jonathan asked gently, searching my face for any sign of regret. I stopped and looked back at the brightly lit country club one last time. I thought about the forged conservatorship documents sitting on the ruined sweetheart table. I thought about the federal bank fraud indictment papers currently shaking in my father's trembling hands. I had walked away, leaving my family completely trapped in the ruins of their own making. They would spend the rest of their miserable lives paying for what they had deliberately done to me. "I am finally free," I told him, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in years. I stepped into the waiting, chauffeur-driven car. I pulled the door shut with a solid click, leaned my head back against the plush leather seat, and watched the country club fade into the darkness. For the first time in 7 years, I was not driving toward another emergency my family had manufactured. I was leaving it behind. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse with a mug of coffee warming my hands. The city stretched below me in bright morning light. Inside, the financial literacy firm I had built with a portion of my inheritance was already at work. Its purpose was simple: help vulnerable women understand accounts, credit, debt, ownership, and the warning signs of financial exploitation before someone they trusted could trap them the way my family had trapped me. I did not need another revenge scheme. I needed the knowledge I had once used only to survive to become useful to people who were still fighting for control of their own lives. The firm mattered to me because I knew how easy it was for financial control to hide inside ordinary family language. "Help us this month. Sign this for convenience. Do not worry about the paperwork. You owe us because we raised you." None of those sentences sounds like a crime by itself, and that was precisely why I had obeyed them for so long. I wanted the women who came through my doors to learn the practical things I had learned too late. Read what carries your name, check your credit, understand where your money goes, keep copies, and never confuse secrecy with family loyalty. I did not tell them to become suspicious of everyone they loved. I wanted them to become informed enough that love could not be used as a substitute for consent. Building that work gave my grandfather's inheritance a purpose beyond comfort. The penthouse was peaceful, and I was grateful for it, but the greatest luxury was no longer having to ask permission to protect myself. 6 months was long enough for the public spectacle at Oak Creek Country Club to become a legal and financial reckoning. I did not need photographs of agents at a door or gossip from former friends to understand what had happened. The official notices told the story plainly. My parents lost the $13 million mansion to federal seizure as the government and the bank moved to recover losses tied to the fraudulent loan and the other assets caught in the same investigation. The home Richard had used for years as proof of his superiority was no longer his. The irony was almost too precise. For 7 years he had frightened me with invented warnings that the house would be taken unless I kept sending money. In the end, the house was taken because of the fraud he chose to commit in my name. Their social standing disappeared with the money. The business relationships Richard had treated like permanent extensions of his influence did not survive the federal bank fraud case or the humiliation of the wedding reception. Jared's family had already withdrawn their business ties that night, horrified by what had been exposed in front of 300 guests. Other people who once laughed at Richard's jokes and praised his supposed financial brilliance stopped treating his name like a guarantee of success. I did not celebrate every loss individually. I simply recognized the pattern. Their image had depended on everyone accepting the story they told. Once the documents became public, the story could no longer carry them. The assets obtained through the deception were no longer symbols they could display as trophies. The fraud investigation stripped away the illusion that the Tesla, the country club status, and the wedding extravagance had come from effortless family wealth. Those things were connected to stolen wages, false claims, and a loan Richard had placed in my name without my consent. For years they had made me feel ashamed of living carefully while they spent recklessly. 6 months later, I understood that my old Honda and my small apartment had never been evidence of failure. They were evidence that I had been living within the truth while my family was financing a performance. Chloe and Jared were going through exactly the kind of bitter, bankrupt divorce the outline of their marriage had been warning about from the beginning. At the wedding, Jared had turned on Chloe the moment his legal career and reputation were threatened. That rupture never healed. The wealth and status each of them had expected to inherit through the other side of the family were gone, and all that remained was blame. Their divorce filings were filled with arguments over debt, unpaid obligations, and who had misrepresented what. The marriage that had looked so polished under the country club chandeliers had lasted only long enough for the financial fantasy beneath it to collapse. Jared's law license was no longer the weapon he had once waved over me with such confidence. The disciplinary process built from the conservatorship drafts, the preserved version history, and the network records forced his conduct into professional review. What mattered to me was not the satisfaction of watching him lose status. It was knowing he could not simply pretend the documents had never existed. He had written a plan to portray me as incompetent, so my father could seize control of the trust, and his own digital trail showed exactly how deliberately he had done it. The same arrogance that made him believe I would never understand the paperwork had preserved the evidence that answered him. My parents never received $1 from my grandfather's estate. The blind corporate trust remained under my control, exactly as Jonathan had structured it, protecting the $12 million in liquid assets and the $38 million in commercial real estate from the family members who had tried to reach it. I did not use the inheritance to recreate their life at a higher price point. I bought the penthouse because I wanted a home that felt secure, not because I needed strangers to be impressed by the address. I kept careful records, met with professionals, and treated the portfolio with the same attention I once gave to tiny business ledgers at my kitchen table. The difference was that the work now built my future instead of financing someone else's deception. Most of all, I stopped answering manufactured emergencies. For 7 years, a call from Susan about medication or a message from Richard about foreclosure could rearrange my entire week. I would cancel my own needs, accept another client transfer, another $3,000, and tell myself that exhaustion was proof of love. 6 months without that cycle felt almost unreal at first. Then it began to feel normal. I could buy groceries without calculating what remained after their transfer. I could schedule my own life without waiting for the next crisis. The quiet was not loneliness. It was the sound of control returning to me. That was why the financial literacy firm mattered more to me than any luxury purchase. I had spent years understanding numbers while failing to understand what financial abuse could look like inside a family. I wanted vulnerable women to know how to read their own statements, check their credit question debts, carrying their names, preserve documents, and recognize when guilt was being used to override consent. I could not rewrite the years I had lost, but I could make what I learned useful. Every time someone walked away from the firm, understanding one more account, one more contract, or one more warning sign, my grandfather's legacy became something larger than revenge. Standing on the balcony, I thought about the two versions of wealth I had known. My parents' version needed witnesses. It needed chandeliers, designer clothes, expensive cars, and rooms full of people willing to applaud. My grandfather's gift had taught me something different. Real security was quiet. It was ownership. You understood documents, you had read boundaries you were willing to enforce, and the freedom to say no without fearing that love would be withdrawn as punishment. I had once believed winning meant making my family finally admit that I was not the dumb one. 6 months later, I no longer needed the admission. Their opinion had stopped being the account from which I measured my worth. After Jonathan left, I stayed on the balcony alone. The solitude no longer felt like exile, it felt like space. Far below, traffic moved through the city in thin streams, while the morning sun flashed against the glass towers. I thought about Table 43, the swinging kitchen doors, the cheap glass of water, and the laughter that had once made me want to disappear. I was still Claire, still a bookkeeper at heart, still someone who noticed numbers other people ignored. The difference was that I no longer used those skills to keep people comfortable while they diminished me. I used them to protect what was mine and to help other women see what was happening inside their own accounts before it was too late. I turned away from the railing and walked back toward the glass doors. My grandfather's inheritance had given me financial freedom, but the most important change had happened before I spent $1 of it. I had stopped accepting my family's definition of me. They had called kindness, stupidity, obedience, incompetence, and sacrifice weakness, because those labels made me easier to control. Once I read the fine print of their behavior, as carefully as I read a ledger, the pattern became impossible to ignore. My future was no longer a line item in somebody else's plan. It belonged to me. I learned the hard way that you can't buy love, but you can certainly afford a good lawyer to protect yourself from the people who pretend to love you. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family, only to prove them all wrong? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. If you believe the truth always comes to light, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember to always read the fine print, especially with family.